Global Conservation Corps presents the RHINO MAN podcast. I'm John Jerko, your host, and one of the directors of RHINO MAN the movie. This podcast series is a way for me to interview top conservationists on the topics of rhinos, the poaching crisis, the importance of rangers, and community engagement, all as a way to create awareness around these issues and to promote the coming release of our documentary film. In this episode, I'm talking with one of my best friends in the world, Matthew Lindenberg. Matt is the founder and executive director of the Global Conservation Corps and a co-director and producer of RHINO MAN the movie. Early on, Matt studied at the Southern African Wildlife College, where he subsequently worked for 6 years. During this time, Matt was mentored by Martin Mthembu, one of the finest ranger trainers in the African continent. Matt went on to attain his master's in Cheetah Conservation from Grand Valley State University. After Martin passed away in 2014, Matt was compelled to continue Martin's legacy of conservation, and he did so by founding GCC and RHINO MAN the movie. In this conversation, Matt and I dig deep into his early connection to wildlife, his years of moving around South Africa and the US, his struggle for direction during his youth, how he eventually reconnected with his love of nature, and the path down which following his passion took him. We dive into the inspiration for starting the Global Conservation Corps, how RHINO MAN the movie came about, the trials and tribulations we both had while bringing the film to life, and some of the recent challenges since COVID-19 changed the world. There are a ton of amazing stories of overcoming struggle, finding one's direction, and committing to something bigger than oneself. Join us for a fun conversation between two good friends. Hey, welcome to the show, Brother Hakla, Matt. Good to have you on the RHINO MAN podcast finally. It's pretty cool that we're actually sitting down and doing one of these just one-on-one.
Thanks so much, John. Great to be here, man. It's been a long time coming and a huge honor to be here, especially seeing the quality of the folks you've interviewed in the last few weeks and being able to spend some time with you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to dive into so many things with you, from getting into some of the nitty gritty of RHINO MAN and that whole process of creating this film over the years, to GCC and the nonprofit, and a lot of your background and how you got into conservation. But why don't we just start out with kind of a funny story and talk about how Mahakla came about and what that word means. I don't know if anyone else calls us by this, but we've decided to call ourselves Mahakla.
That's a good place to start, John. Yeah, so for some context, the word Mahakla in Xitsonga, the local language here next to Kruger National Park, means twins. And through the filming of the RHINO MAN documentary, we came across some really cool footage, seeing Ruben and Martin, these two icons in the ranger training field. And there's this one scene where you see them walking together after a ranger graduation, and Ruben saying, you know, they used to call us the twins. And for you and I, John, we were stuck together in lockdown for almost an entire year. Mm-hmm. And we did everything from, you know, figuring out how to run a nonprofit to playing ultimate frisbee in the dark. Yeah, I think the story came about when we popped into the butchery to go and grab some supplies.
Good old Frank's.
Good old fat Frank's. And yeah, they the lady there at the counter just saw us so much they started calling us the twins. At least we asked them to start calling us the twins because we felt like it would be quite an endearing nickname. So yeah, it's Mahakla podcast. Good to be here.
Yeah. And I think we actually asked her what's the word for twins, and she told us Mahakla. And then that's where it all started. So if you hear us calling each other Mahakla, you'll know what the backstory is. So
which is ironic because we couldn't be like further how we look. You tall, dark, and handsome, and I'm shorter, blonde, and not handsome like you, man. So yeah, it's quite a contrast.
Yeah. I don't know. I think the ladies beg to differ, but but yeah. Before we get into anything, any of these stories too deep, let's just give some context to what you're doing right now. What is the name of the nonprofit? What's your role, for anyone that hasn't heard anything about what you're doing?
Yeah, so I'm the founder and executive director of the Global Conservation Corps. We're a 501c3 US registered nonprofit, as well as a Section 18A South African nonprofit organization. And the focus of GCC, we are coming up for 7 years as an organization, is to bridge that gap between communities and wildlife. As you know really well, John, there's a massive disconnect between the local populations that live against or adjacent to these wildlife areas and then the conservation areas that are inside the fence. And so GCC's whole mission is to break down barriers, create access and opportunities for the people that live right next door to these areas, but more than likely have never connected with that wildlife before.
Yeah, that's really great. And I want to dive into more about what you're doing there, but let's just kind of start from the beginning and how you got into conservation and found your way to doing what you're doing. What's the very beginnings for you? Maybe what was one of the first times you felt connected to nature?
So my mom's mom, was an avid birder, and I spent the first 7 years of my life in Johannesburg, which, massive city, tons of traffic, congestion, pollution. But in my grand's garden, she had this phenomenal bird feeder, and she used to put seeds and fruit for the different bird species that would come through on their way to places like Kruger National Park, especially during the migratory season. And Lainey is who I called her. Lainey and I would look at all these different birds, and it was just so much fun. And the colors and the beauty and the shapes, the sizes, learning about, oh no, this bird just came from Russia and it's coming through on the way down, or from West Africa. So much beauty in these, massive, tiny birds. So some of those early memories really helped shape a love of birds in my heart. And when I was 7, my parents sold everything up in Johannesburg because the crime was really starting to increase towards the end of the 90s. And we moved out to a really small forestry town called Sabi, which is on the panorama route here, about an hour away from the Kruger National Park. And it's relatively high altitude for South Africa, so it does get really cold. It is quite a remote place. And so for 4 years of my life, I grew up every single weekend going into the forests with mom and my dad and my sister. And we got to see waterfalls, and we got to see lilies, for example. Sabi is really famous for lilies, just surrounded by all this different type of really, really cool nature. And then for special occasions, my dad, and sometimes the rest of my family, but my dad was very passionate on this, would take myself and some of our guests from the guest house into Kruger National Park. And sometimes that there's dogs living in our house because there's all the smudges on the windows. Well, that was me in a car in the Kruger National Park. You knew Matt was in the Kruger Park because you could just see all the smudge marks on the windows of that car. I left no window untainted. I couldn't be close enough to that wildlife. I remember a couple of really cool stories. The first one was for my 9th birthday. We never stayed over in the Kruger National Park. But for my 9th birthday, I remember, because I was the watchdog, I knew where all the camps were, I knew the times, and I knew that we were running late to exit in the south of Kruger National Park. And I kept saying, but Dad, we're going to miss, we have to be out of the park. Like, these are the rules. Like, this is the way it is. And he turned around and looked at me and he said, we're not leaving the park tonight, my boy. We're staying here at Bergendal. And that was the coolest. I laid awake all night. I heard lions, I heard hyenas, I heard noises that I had no clue what they were. And in the morning, my gran and I, who was with for my birthday, we sat at a waterhole and saw an African fish eagle take a fish right out of the water. And everything, it feels like life slows down a lot for me when I think about these memories, or I'm really connected. And I remember frame by frame how that fish eagle took that, probably just a bass or a tilapia out the water, but phenomenal. And then the other really pivotal memory that I had in my life was around the same age, around 9. My parents took me to go and get lunch in Londolozi, which is a very, fancy, famous reserve, known really well for leopard sightings. And we got to go there and eat the lunch. We definitely couldn't afford to stay over, but we maxed out our lunch. And my dad, being a really good salesman, he managed to convince the lodge manager to arrange for 2 massive Shangani rangers, field rangers, not the guides, but the actual law enforcement officers, to take me for a walk around the bush for an hour. And it was like stepping into this unknown world, this world of legends and giants and heroes and these icons in my mind. We found lion tracks, we walked up to hippos, and we walked past a bush where there was this snake, and they said, close your eyes, close your eyes. And they said it was a Mozambican spitting cobra. They might have been having me on, but in my mind, like they saved me from this Mozambique spitting cobra for sure. And that memory sort of faded into the background because 2 years later, my parents got divorced. My whole world turned upside down, to be honest. And my dad took us to America. He took my sister and I to the States. And so from 11 to 19, I lived in about 10 different provinces or states across the US, anywhere from Connecticut all the way through California and ending up in Hawaii. And I remember I was 19 years old, living in Hawaii, living in paradise, and realizing that I was completely miserable. I'd lived, I think, at that point in about 27 different homes. I had finished high school and I'd been to 19 different schools. So my whole life, especially after the divorce, was just constant change and never really being able to connect with my heart and understand what made me happy. It was always a lot of pressure about what society or what what society wanted or what would make good money or allow me to afford a good life. But I never really had the time to think about what moved me, what touched me, what did I want to do with my life. And so I remember being on that beach. It was probably 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I took a journal down and I was just writing, trying to understand how could I be so dissatisfied with life when I'm sitting on one of the most exclusive pieces of land in the world, surrounded by the ocean and mountains and jungles. And people spend their entire lives saving up to go to Hawaii. There I was, not happy. And I suppose took a little bit of courage to dig deep and think about asking myself, especially like, the inner voice inside, or the inner child almost, like, hey, when were you happy? And it took me back to that memory of being with those rangers and how connected I felt and how inspired I felt. Like anything was possible, that there were limitless adventures on the horizon. And so 2 weeks later, I packed up my entire life in Hawaii. I said goodbye to my dad, my sister, some of my only friends that I had. And turned in the green card and moved back to South Africa just to follow my heart, to follow my passion. I had no idea where I was going. My adopted grand, Joan, had a family friend whose daughter was the CEO of the Wildlife College, Theresa Sari.
Actually, could I stop you there? Before you get in too deep into this story, I just kind of want to back up a little bit and ask you, during those years, kind of in between leaving South Africa and deciding to go back, were there any other paths or things that you thought maybe this is the way I should go, or things that you tried, or, what was that time like for you? And, when did you hit those walls where you're like, no, this, I'm still not satisfied, or this doesn't feel right?
Really good question. Yeah, I suppose I just browsed through the teenage years, but from the age of 12 to 14, I was a skateboarder. That was my life. I resonated, I think, with a lot of other frustrated youth that wanted just to have their freedom and their ability to be expressive and creative. So definitely resonated with the skateboard scene. I then lived in Montana and Idaho from the age of 14 through 15 and 16, and I got deeply into snowboarding. So I had like a small little snowboarding sponsorship. I did a lot of stuff in Big Sky, Montana, some competitions in Schweitzer and Idaho. And at that time, snowboarding consumed my life. Again, it was the freedom. It was the ability to be who I was, to have no limits, and just to go fast. Love going fast. The bigger the jump, the better. The more dangerous, the better. I needed to feel something. And I think trauma has the ability to shut down a lot of your senses and make you numb in a way. And I think snowboarding allowed me to feel connected and feel like I not only was good at something, but I felt alive doing something, which seems to be a trend. I then found out about this amazing game called tennis when I was about 15. And I've got a really great lineage of athletes and sportsmen and women in my family, and was somehow able to pick up tennis really quickly. And I progressed so fast that by the time I was 15, I moved out of home. I moved from Idaho back to Bozeman, Montana, so I could be at a much bigger, better high school to play competitive tennis. And during that summer of, I believe, 2006, summer of 2006, through a very serendipitous encounter, I met a friend of Lindsay Davenport, the number one or the ex-number one US tennis player in the world. And he offered to train me and bring me to his home in Denver, Colorado for a few months of the year, and then to focus on really getting strong in the desert in California. So I spent my senior year of high school, matric as we call it in South Africa, being homeschooled. And I would probably do my schooling from 6 a.m. to 8. I breezed through school. And then from 8 o'clock until the rest of the day, I was involved in a high performance tennis academy where we were pushing the limits. I would do Pilates for an hour and a half to work on, my core muscles and flexibility. I would then run drills for 2 or 3 hours. I would then have lunch, maybe a massage to kind of help, because at that level, you're putting your body through so much rigor and intense training. You take a massive beating. And then after lunch, Monday through Friday, I'd play 2 back-to-back tennis matches up against some of the most incredible juniors and, sort of professional tennis players in the world. I remember one day we had Dusan Vemic come, who at the time had a serve faster than Andy Roddick. And he could serve that ball at about 155 miles an hour. And
Jeez.
I remember just being there and feeling so in awe of this guy's incredible ability, but also just so out of my depth. I think at that moment, I thought I understood that no matter how bad I wanted this opportunity to go pro at tennis, it was going to be an absolute slog to get there. I progressed through the juniors relatively well. I was in the top 100 in Southern California in all of the juniors. And I had a national ranking of within the top 500 for all juniors in the US, which wasn't, a massive feat, but for someone who had picked up tennis 2 years before, it wasn't bad because I was playing against youth that had been playing tennis since 4 and 5 years old. I also got the opportunity to play in Indian Wells, which is next to the 4 Grand Slams in the world, the 5th largest tennis tournament in the world. And I played in the pre-qualifier, and it was a really exciting opportunity and experience. I got absolutely smoked in my first match. I lost 6-0, 6-1, but I very proudly got one game off the number 1 from UCLA at the time, which was a huge accomplishment for me. But it also gave me the opportunity to be in the locker room, because I was a player in the tournament, with Rafael Nadal, with Roger Federer, and to see firsthand what greatness, but also humility really looked like. It was a huge, incredible opportunity. And then in 2008, early 2008, I'd gotten, I believe, 7 or 8 scholarship opportunities and offers from a lot of UC schools. And I remember I was playing the number 50 in California, and I was beating him. I think I was up 3-1, really excited, in my zone. Finally, all the coaching that I had been exposed to and pushed through started to click.
Mm-hmm.
And this guy had an amazing backhand down the line. I went, but as I went, my knee for some reason went the other way, and I got a grade 2 MCL tear, which completely, everything changed then. The scholarship offers were retracted. My time with tennis had come to a close. That sort of closed that tennis chapter for me. I still continued to coach, to provide an income for myself while I was in this transitionary time. But tennis taught me an insane amount about hard work, about you don't have to be the biggest, baddest player in the room, but if you've got heart, if you have grit, if you hang in there just one more shot, you might get your shot. But you've got to hold the course. So tennis transcended more than just a physical sport for me. It was definitely an intellectual challenge, but a spiritual growing experience as well. So really grateful for that time.
What was that experience like once you realized that it wasn't going to be your path? Were you kind of set on that path at the time, or did you already realize, because you said that, when you saw some of these other guys that were so much further ahead of you, did you kind of tell yourself, like, I don't know if I'm fully into this because I see how much more work it's going to take? I'm just curious where that moment, what those moments were like for you, and when you made that shift of, maybe this isn't going to be the direction I go.
I think even when I saw someone like Dusan Vemic serving, and I saw Dennis Ralston, who's a Wimbledon champion, run his coaching courses with some of his best Serbian players, like there was always this fire inside of me that said, if you work hard enough, you can do this, but it's going to take something that you don't know and you don't understand just yet. But hang in there. When I had the injury, maybe 9 months later, that was truly a turning point, because maybe it's a bit like a racehorse, right? You get one small fracture, you get one small sprain, and the difference between good and great is so small, but it's also so big that at that point it was time to turn it in. But it was a horrible experience because tennis was my life. I was defined by that sport. I was defined by my success. I was defined by what other people thought of me, and also how much it meant to my family to see me doing well. I only realize it now, but I think a substantial part of playing tennis to that level was to earn the recognition of my family, so that they could feel like, oh, Matt's going somewhere. Like, he's worthy of love. He's worthy of our time and recognition and support. So while I loved and still do love tennis, I wouldn't say it was my calling, because the intentions weren't 100% genuine. Tennis was also a place for me to escape a lot of instability growing up. It was a way for me to have something to focus on. It was a way for me to feel like I was moving forward with my future and taking charge of it. So it gave me a lot. But at the end of the day, I think I realized that there's got to be something more. I just didn't know. It's almost like, that air is real. Like, that oxygen is real, but you can't see it. You can't understand it. But it doesn't mean that you don't feel the wind when it blows.
Mm-hmm. How long was it from that point to when you were on that beach writing in the journal?
Oh, man, that was about 1.5 years. I then decided my next passion and calling was to become a fighter pilot. So I moved up to Montana State University. I enrolled as an out-of-state student, which is crazy because it's double the prices. And I had no savings, no sort of, let's say, financial support from the family at that time. As much as they wanted to help, it just wasn't an option. So I took out an $11,000 loan for my first semester at Montana State University. And I co-signed it with my mom's fiance at the time. So my mom was living in Bozeman, my sister was living in Bozeman, and we had this small sort of pseudo family. And 2 days before I started my my first day of college, where I was studying mechanical engineering and doing the ROTC to become a fighter pilot, my mom told me that her and her partner at the time weren't going to work out, and my mom and my sister were leaving within a week. And so there I was, having worked so hard to try and find family again in this life, and they were leaving and they were gone. So I stuck it out at Montana State for a semester. I then just looked at the finances and said, by the time I graduate with an undergraduate degree, I'm going to be $80,000 plus in the hole. I need to think of something different. So for another semester, I worked as a Lowe's associate. I worked in lumber, I worked in paint. It was quite an interesting experience. I worked also in Big Sky doing landscaping and mowing lawns. I have a horrible allergy to grass, but it was the best way I had to make an income, to support myself. And those were dark times for me. I definitely went down the wrong path. I think we know how prevalent drugs and alcohol are in the States and across the world, and how easy it is to get into those types of substances and escapism when you're hurting and lost inside. And so I did go down that path, and I explored, and I had this is pretty deep and probably could I don't know, surprise some folks, but I think you've got to know pain and you've got to know despair to know true joy. And I remember one night going out with my mates, and I got a hold of probably 5 different Schedule 1 drugs, illegal substances that shouldn't be in the hands of an 18-year-old. And I went all in. And I remember the next morning waking up, going to talk to my roommates and saying, hey, mate, like, I'd love to mow the lawn. I'd love to mow the lawn for you guys. I had had a huge fever that night, a horrible reaction. I saw visions, hot flashes. And my mate looked at me and he said, Matt, you've mowed the lawn. What are you talking about? And there was this moment for me where I just realized I was completely and utterly lost. I had no direction. I was drifting. I was getting into a place where you don't come back from. And I needed to turn my life around, and I needed to find family. And so what I did is I sold everything I had, which amounted to 1 plane ticket, one way to Oahu. And that's where my dad was living with my sister. My sister had moved to Hawaii as well. As you can tell, we move a lot as our family. And I needed that time. I needed 9 months where I had some support, and I was surrounded by my dad and my sister who could hold me accountable and who saw the best in me, not who I was, but who I could become. And they held me to that standard, which I'll never forget. And that's what led me to that moment on the beach where I realized things need to change, and nothing's going to last forever. And we might touch on a few of the near-death experiences I've faced in my life so far, but having that moment where I was so far out of my body and so far out of my mind, so lost and hurting, and just feeling so alone, I knew that something needed to change.
Yeah. It's interesting. I feel like there's a lot of full circle moments in your story. The Ranger moment is one of them that we're going to get to here soon, but also I feel like you were heavily influenced by the film Top Gun with the desire to become a fighter pilot, which I shared. I didn't actually ever commit beyond, maybe half of my pilot's license when I was in my teen years, but but yeah, that film was pretty influential. And then I don't know if we'll really get into it, but the production company we worked for that also was a partner in starting this film. A big part of it was shooting these mentorship videos for Home Depot, and a lot of them started out as, part-time cashiers and things like that, like you did at Lowe's. So it's just interesting.
It's definitely full circle.
Parallels.
And one thing I think I failed to mention too, John, is that 3 months into my fighter pilot career, I went for a color vision test, and I realized that I'm red-green colorblind. So those hopes and dreams kind of crashed and burned like the scene from Little Miss Sunshine. It actually does happen. So no dice.
Well, I mean, that took you on this journey to South Africa. So maybe we can jump back into where you were going with that moment after being on the beach and kind of figuring out you needed to return there to find your path.
Yeah. Like we've watched a ton of Batman together, and I feel like if you are having a rough moment, you could pull out a quote from Batman and it'll make sense in your life. And I feel like in this moment, I want to say, I think it was Jim Gordon or the Commissioner Gordon, and he talks about, like the night is always darkest before the dawn. And I feel like that was my real dark night of the soul. But having that epiphany of moving back to South Africa, chasing that dream of connecting with wildlife, these iconic species that I'd been disconnected from for 10 years, completely disconnected. I took that leap of faith, got on that plane. I got the opportunity to get paired up at the Wildlife College for a 1 month guiding course. And my mom covered that cost, which was brilliant of her. And I went and I trained how to become a field guide, someone that takes tourists around the bush. And the whole goal is to interpret and to explain not just facts and figures, but the beauty and the interconnectedness of the natural world. That's the job. So I had this opportunity to train for a month, and it was myself, an Afrikaans girl, and then 9 Shangani men from the local community that had gotten scholarships. And it was an amazing thing to be able to learn about their stories. And for me, that got me just as excited about the animals as the people, hearing their stories and how their great-grandfathers were trackers in this area, not tracking for a tip or for a payday, but tracking to find a cow that had gotten lost in the bush, and they had to find it before the lions found it. So that was a beautiful moment. But things got really interesting because when I finished my qualification after a month, it's called FAGASA, so it's the Field Guides Association of Southern Africa. When I had that qualification, I had a job offer. And so I went to sort of proceed with applying for that job. And when I called, the job was gone. The owner of the lodge just didn't even reply. It was his secretary and just said, the job's taken. Bah, put the phone down. That's it. And I remember where I was. I was calling from a payphone the day that I graduated from the Wildlife College. And I turned down 3 other jobs because I wanted this job. And for a month and a half, I couldn't find any other work. So I went back to Joburg. I lived with my mom and my adopted grand Joan. And I was the mopiest person you've ever come across. I was down. I was super down because I'd had this taste of what life could be. And now I couldn't access it. I couldn't get back in that world. I was almost, I wouldn't say exiled, but I had no way to get back in. And so every Thursday, my granny Joan and I would go for a meditation class. That became our routine, our ritual. And meditations stayed a big part of my life thanks to the influence from Joan. But the one Thursday that it's ever in the history of meditations with Rita got cancelled. Jones just turned 80 last year. She was probably late 60s at the time. She looked at me and said, Matt, you depressed? We're going out. Put on your jeans. And she took me to the casino at the airport, like every good grand does. Let's go and learn about, risking it all. And yeah, she gave me, $3, $4, $5 to gamble, which was a lot more than I had. And I lost it all. And then we were having this amazing seafood dinner inside this casino, which is huge, massive, really like affluent people. And it's just busy, like metropolitan people from all over the world. And I remember having a lovely seafood supper. Then we're going to dessert. And as I look up, I look past Joan, and through this, I'm talking about a sea of people, a sea. I see through this tiny gap a face that I recognize. And it turns out it's the CEO of the Wildlife College, Teresa Sari. And it's almost like something just took over in me. And I ran. I just ran right. I said, sorry, Joan, I got to go. Ran up to her, probably knocked a few people over. I don't remember. I blacked out. But I got to Teresa and I said, hi, Teresa, it's Matt. I've just spent a month at your amazing college. I just thought I'd say hi. And she said, oh, Matt, cool. Good to see you. What are you doing now? And I said, well, I'm nothing. I'm not working. And she said, you could see kind of Teresa's got a really, what would you call it? Like, not expressive face, but she's got these bright eyes. And when the wheels really turn, you can almost see these, like the brightness turn up. And she said, all right, well, you start volunteering for us on Monday. We'll see you there. Oh man. The ride home with Joan was like a party in the car. I came home. I woke my mom up. She thought there was a break-in. I was banging on the windows. Mom, I got a job. She's like, cool, how much does it pay? I was like, it doesn't, but I got a job. Like, it's cool. I'm technically a volunteer, but yeah. And honestly, John, like that moment, if that moment hadn't come into my life, none of us would have an idea really of where else we would have gone. Like we
Yeah.
hear where we are, but I have no idea where I would have been. But I can guarantee you it wouldn't have been nearly as rewarding, rich, and life-changing as what I was about to go and embark on.
I mean, there's just so many chance things that happened in that moment, from Joan just taking you to the casino, which is definitely out of the ordinary from what you're saying. Which Joan, by the way, is an amazing human being. I've had the privilege of getting to spend some time with her and at her house in South Africa. And then, I was thinking, as you said, you spotted Teresa walking through this crowd. You have an incredible eye for wildlife when you're, out in the bush, just spotting birds and tracks and all these things. So it's interesting that that skill was almost applied in this moment as well, of like, the slightest amount of Teresa behind all these people you were able to spot. I feel like a lot of people may have not been able to do that. And then the fact that she maybe saw in you this, desire to kind of follow this path and gave you an opportunity. And you actually made the effort of going up to her, which I feel like a lot of people might be like, well, she runs this place, she probably wouldn't want to talk to me or something like that. But you had enough passion and drive and desire to see if something could happen, that you went up and took that chance, and something did happen. So yeah, it's just kind of an interesting mix of chance and serendipity, and also taking action in a moment when you could have just sat back.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I guess the older that one gets, the more insights you have, the more knowledge you have to pull from. And I feel like the universe is always going to give what you give, right? Like, but you have to take that first step. I think that's critical. I think there's a whole world of opportunity and possibility out there, but unless you take that first step, you're not going to get matched, because there's no resonance then with that other side, with that magic. And so, yeah, taking that that leap of faith, and at the risk of looking like an absolute crazy person running through the crowd to find it, completely worth it.
So what was that volunteer aspect like, and how did that lead to, this might be a longer story, I'm not sure, but how did that eventually lead to you connecting with what the Rangers were doing there and that whole side of things?
Yeah, for sure. So when I started, John, I was a volunteer. I basically did whatever it took to learn and to grow. So the Wildlife College is a phenomenal organization, absolutely visionary. It's transformative. It really does change a lot of lives. And so when I went there, I was basically thrown into the thick of things and learned about all the different offerings that the college has. So training guides, training reserve managers, training field rangers. Since then they've got a canine unit, they've got an aerial wing, they've got students that come in from all over the world, like on university tours. So when I went in there, it was still let's say, it was still almost a grassroots organization, where now it is more definitely, a professional higher learning institution. So it's definitely
Mhm.
grown under Teresa's leadership. But my first couple of years they saw me do, I was the community liaison officer for a couple of years. So that was a lot of engaging with the local schools, with the chiefs, understanding how the Wildlife College, small as it was, could help promote some sustainable development and bringing education to the communities. I also worked as a field guide assistant. So I helped my boss at the time, Javi, run field guiding training. So, doing a lot of a lot of walks in the bush, a lot of time out in nature. And that transitioned to a couple of things. The first one was I realized pretty quickly on that I'm skilled at organizing things and scheduling things and putting things into place in the sequence that it needs to happen. So I got promoted to the logistics manager at the Wildlife College. I think I was 22, which was a really great opportunity for me. And while this was happening, I was studying at night my undergraduate degree with the University of South Africa. So I would sort of work all day, and then by night, when students, kids, like 22-year-old kids, were out partying with their friends, I was, here in Kruger National Park or at the Wildlife College studying, sometimes by candlelight because of no power. And that was my life for 3 years that it took me to get through my undergrad in environmental management. But I would say 2 years into working at the Wildlife College, I remember meeting Martin Mthembu for the first time, and he was sitting in this dining hall, And the college has got students from all over the world. And I remember standing in the line, because it's like a military canteen almost. You stand in the line with your tray and you move forward, really well. You've eaten there a lot. And you sort of just herded through. And as I was waiting in line, I noticed almost every student that had gotten a plate of food would walk past the instructor's table and pay homage, pay tribute, just greet this really powerful looking man. And I thought, let me go and say hi. So I walked past. And the craziest thing was, I said hello, and he said, Bwana, which means it's a word for sir in Swahili. He said, Bwana, join me, sit down. And I had a meal with Martin Mthembu, and he was so interested in my life and where I was from and what I was doing. And I had no idea the level of greatness that I was in front of. I think it was shrouded in this very quiet, strong humility that, I wouldn't say I'm the most intelligent person. And I should have picked up on it, because the fact that all these people were coming to pay homage, it should have been an indication, but I just thought maybe he was, just popular. Way more than that. Transformative trainer. And I remember meeting Martin, and very soon after that, I had my opportunity to be a protective rifle. So I was qualified with certain rifles, and I would go out with Martin, and I think we completed about 10 different training weeks together. Mm-hmm. Whereas every single week, we would take 15 to 30 field ranger students, and we would go and sleep out and live and exist in the Greater Kruger National Park, where we would train rangers and train these students on how to survive in the bush, how to communicate, how to navigate, how to erect shelters, how to find water, how to find food, and most importantly, how to deal with poachers. Because when I started at the college, 2009, 2010, that's when rhino poaching just started, around that 2008 area. So I came in at a time where we went from rangers being, community-facing stewards of the environment to all of a sudden being armed paramilitary soldiers with, semi-automatic weapons. So I was there for that transition, and I was fortunate enough to study under someone like Martin and his best friend, Ruben, who taught me an immense amount about the value of people in conservation.
Yeah. Can you go into some more stories with Martin? What was, you talked about all these people paying homage to him as they're walking by, but for someone that has never met the man, can you kind of describe some of his qualities or personality and some of the lessons that he left you with?
I wish, there's a lot of stories, and my goal is to make sure that as many stories as I've been privileged enough to experience get out one day. But for now, maybe one or two stories that really exemplify Martin's strength and calmness under pressure. So back in 2013, my friend Yaku and I had just completed training different classes, and it had taken us 6 weeks of intensive training these different students. I celebrated with quite a lot of wine, so did Yaku, and we decided to do a perimeter walk around the college at night, which is, it's in Kruger National Park, basically, and you've got Big Five. And I remember walking and stumbling and slipping in the mud way too much to drink, and something in front of us made a noise, and I decided, it didn't feel right. So I turned back, went home, probably went to bed at around 2 o'clock in the morning. About 300 meters away from where I was staying is where Martin was staying. And Martin woke up at 5 o'clock that morning, a few hours after I'd been, putzing around along the fence line. Martin's tent was on the fence line. And as he woke up, he had a couple of whiskeys the night before as well. As he woke up, rubbed the sleep out of his eyes, looked across the savannah and the plains of the wildlife college. He picked up this movement right in front of him. And as he sort of adjusted his eyes, he realized it was a lioness walking across his field of view. The problem was the lioness wasn't outside the fence. She was inside the fence. And then that's when my phone rang. Because at the time, myself and Khavi were the only two individuals that had rifles on this entire campus that at the time had about 150 students staying there. And so you can imagine 3 hours of sleep, too much wine, got a hangover, wake up, just trying to figure out what is going on at 5 o'clock in the morning. And it's Khavi, and he says, come to the gun safe. We've got to get our rifles. There's a lioness on campus. It's time to move. We spent a couple of hours trying to locate this lioness. Then what happened was my job was to tell all the students 150 at least. I went from door to door. This was before like all the smartphone era. Door to door, knocking. Guys, please stay in your rooms. Like, there's a lioness on campus. You can't have your breakfast. We're gonna do a meal for you later. A lot of them just laughed at me. They're like, Matt, we're from Zambia, where like we don't have fences. We live with lions. Like, this is normal for us. I said, guys, don't think I'm crazy. This is just my order, right? Like I've been given orders. Please follow them. Like, it's for everyone's safety. Okay, cool, no worries. But they laughed. They thought it was a big joke, And I remember just being like, oh, maybe we are very privileged in South Africa compared to the rest of the the African continent with what we think is safe, So then we kept looking for this lioness. I then get a call from Javi. I'm in the bush now looking for this lioness by myself. He says, Matt, we have a situation. The students decided to come to the dining hall and now they're trying to find food. I get there. And it wasn't just a few students. It was like 30 or 40 students that were there now trying to open up the barricade to get food. They were flustered. They were hungry. They didn't know what the big deal was. So very quickly, I had to start ferrying the rest of the students, because now breakfast was served. I had to bring them to the dining hall. So that was a huge just rush and panic, and everyone's chowing food and laughing. And it's like, guys, there's a lioness here, apparently. Then what I have to start doing is taking all the students back to their rooms. And the last group that I ferried, it was 7 ranger candidates that I took down to the tents, and I dropped them off. And as I came back, I saw this Land Cruiser, and it's a safari vehicle. And I could see on it was Martin, Marianne, Ruben, and Javi was driving. And this vehicle is stopped in this long grass, maybe 100 meters away. And when I get a bit closer, I see that they're looking at me. And I can see they're waving their hands, and there's all the sign language going on and pointing and like gesturing. And what I had realized is we had actually just walked past that lioness. I found out later that Martin had seen us walk past, and then the lioness sort of cross over our tracks and hide right by the berm that we had come past. So what I did is, they came around in the vehicle, they picked me up. Javi was driving, so I had the only rifle. And I remember Ruben, who, is great mates of ours, been on the podcast now. And Ruben knows how to ground my gears, hey? He looked at me and he goes with a smile. He's like, oh, that's a very big rifle for such a little man, How does all that power feel as a danger ranger? You're going to be all right with it? And he laughed. But by that point, we had a really good rapport. And I could also see behind Ruben's eyes that there was a level of, this is actually a bit of a serious situation. We have got a lioness on campus, and we're going to go try find it. We then, scrambled in the vehicle, went back into where she was last seen. And as we approach, now, if you think about a safari vehicle, there's 3 rows of seats. I'm in the second row on the left-hand side. On my right, I've got Martin. And behind me, I've got Ruben and Marianne. So I'm surrounded by the most supportive legends in conservation. But I've got the rifle. We locate the lioness. Martin saw it. He said, stop. And she moved through the long grass, and then it just went completely quiet. Harvey switched off the engine, completely quiet, and then all of a sudden you could hear this growling. It was a different type of engine that started up, and this lioness was so close to us, we couldn't see her because she was basically under the bonnet of the car in the front. Time, again, started standing still, and then instantly this lioness was like up on all fours, like almost eye level to us, like you could see she was emaciated. She was incredibly old, wounded. She had mange. She had a limp, massive scar on the back, and she had a milky eye. So one eye was completely shot, and she was definitely at the end of her days. And you could see how much pain she was in. You could also tell just how hungry she was, and that's probably what brought her to the campus as well, to try and find a dog or an easy meal. And there we were. And as she got up and started to show this high level of aggression, I remember Martin and Ruben in my peripherals, they started to sort of cluster around me, and very slowly I could start to feel Martin's presence. He put his left hand on my right shoulder as I sort of cocked the rifle. So I chambered around, and Martin just kept saying, steady, Boina, steady, Boina. Now this lioness is now haunching down. She's about to jump into our vehicle, and I've got 2.5 meters. So what's that, 7 feet between myself and this lioness. And if she jumps in, and if I miss this shot, like Ruben, Marianne, Javi, like we are all here. We've gotten ourselves into this situation. But if we let this lioness out of our sights, we've got 150 students plus staff on campus. We need to know where she is. And at the same time, we've got the veterinarian flying in from Hoedspruit to get there as soon as he could, but he was on a rhino dehorning. So it's just all a little bit too much. And at the same time, Ruben, because when I say at the same time, literally all of these things slow down. Like a fighter pilot can make 60 decisions in 3 seconds. That's how slow time felt. And Ruben put his opposite hand on my left shoulder, and he just said, steady, Matt, steady, Matt. So I have the hands of these two conservation legends and godfathers on me. And for about 10 seconds, I've got my finger on this trigger of this 458, staring down this barrel at this lioness who wants to, it's literally the embodiment of the devil itself. The rage, the pain, all channeled into this cornered feline was something I'll never forget. And about 10 seconds after this really tense moment, you could just see her body tension changed. She sort of did a big shiver and a shake, and she bolted. But that moment, I'll never ever forget, where I had the calmness of these two amazing men and role models to help guide me through a process where if I didn't have that, remember also, like, I'm hungover, I haven't slept, I'm dehydrated because I've been helping to track this line for the last 5-6 hours in a scorching summer heat. If I didn't have those two steady, calm men, if I didn't have Martin on my right, guiding me through this process where people could get hurt or a lion's life could get taken, it could have been a very different situation. And just to round the story out full circle, Doc Rogers arrived, darted the lioness, got her on the back right flank. She ran into the fence, big hole in the fence, but didn't get through. She then turns left and jumps over a 9-foot, 3-meter service delivery gate cattle grid, straight, no problem. Just jumped 3 meters across.
Wow.
And Richard Sowry, the section ranger of Kingfisher Spruit in Kruger at the time, got there with his bloodhound Patches, and they tracked this lioness for 3 kilometers in the bush, where eventually they ran out. They couldn't find her spoor anymore. So we feel like the dart didn't penetrate into the blood and the lymphatic system. But that moment of being so close and in the thick of a really crazy conservation and almost like a humanitarian experience where you're trying to make sure this lioness doesn't snack on any people was a really amazing moment. And just being able to experience that with Martin, who I think through this podcast we've paid a lot of tribute to, and folks know he's trained 15,000 rangers across Africa and beyond. Being there with him as my mentor in that moment when I needed him, unreal.
For sure. And I feel like, I've heard a lot of the stories from you before, but also just working on this project for so long and in the last few years really trying to bring out Martin's story. I feel like I know him a little bit at least. When I have these tough moments or hit some wall or obstacle in this project, RHINO Man, I feel like the thing that always kind of shakes me back into reality or, finding kind of what reason I'm doing this for is, we don't have many words of Martin in the film, but we have Ruben, who is his very close friend, who brings up a lot of the the phrases that Martin used to use, like make a plan and, keep fighting the good fight and things like that. And I feel like watching those scenes and seeing Martin and connecting with his spirit from your stories, it's really helped me get through. So it's just, I feel like his legacy is living on, and that's what we really want to be able to do with the film as well. I don't know if you have any other stories or things you want to share about Martin before maybe we move on to Ruben.
Martin just also had a wicked sense of humor, really dry, really sarcastic. And he had no qualms of just shooting straight. I love that about him. In South Africa, we've got a very disturbed past, and there's a lot of, past, but also existing racial tensions across these very distinct divides. And Martin had no qualms. If you were in his ranger selection, if you were a student in his class, if you were black or white or brown or green, doesn't really, for him, he didn't see that. He saw the quality of who you were. And that's really what he was after. And if you stepped out of line with Martin, he had no problem in giving a clap, as we call it, like a smack, to a student that stepped out of line. And I think that line of thinking where it's not pandering to the weakest in the room, it's enforcing a level of common respect, mutual respect, amongst colleagues, especially in the ranger training business, where you need to make sure that your rangers are up to a certain standard. Otherwise, they could lose their lives or put other people's lives in danger. So Martin really, he was himself. He was himself. He never tried to be someone that he was not. And I think that's what people loved about him too, is he was just really genuine. And he always had time for people. He always had time for a chat. No matter how crazy and stressed he was, he always had time for a cigarette and a chat. And a lot of special moments with Martin. One other interesting thing that I remember about Martin one day is he was telling me, so we were training rangers. This was February 2014. This was the last time that I ever saw Martin. And we were doing an observation post. So what you do is you take your ranger candidates and you put them in strategic positions where their only job is to observe and then report back what they found. So we went to a place called Blue Dam, which is on the college's property, and it was extremely hot. February in South Africa, as you know, it's torturous. And we're under these massive acacia trees by this waterhole. And all the students are scattered about, maybe 20 students, and Martin and I were paired up next to each other. And we had this really interesting conversation about he had been tasked, and I have to be careful with how much I say, but he had been tasked by the prime minister of an African government, of an African state, to find out the level of corruption that was in existence in that government all the way up. And Martin uncovered, and he told me he was uncovering the fact that some extremely high-level officials were involved in ivory poaching. And I suppose I could say an East African country, just to keep it a bit more specific, but neutral. And he said that he was getting really close. And he said that there was, a lot of surprises that were coming to the foreground. And it was, even for him, a tenured soldier and someone that's been dealing with politics and with conservation a long time, he was shocked at how high this level of involvement was. And as we pulled out and we started to walk back 5 kilometers along the fence line towards our camp, Martin was on the fence line. I was on the left of him, and then there was the bush. And Martin froze in the middle of talking to me, and there was a black mamba that had reared up right to the left of me, maybe a foot or two, right next to me above my head, and it reared up and was staring at both of us. And mambas are very sensitive to movement. They're very twitchy and anxious. And Martin, straight away, he put his arm on me and he pushed me back, made himself really big, and that snake was gone. I never saw the snake. That's how quick this, and again, things seem to happen really fast out here in the bush. You think about a lion charge. A lion can cover 20 meters in a second. That's 60 feet in a second on a full tilt charge. Black mambas can go, I think it's something crazy. Correct me if I'm off here, but I think it's 20, 30, 40 kilometers an hour. Mambas are incredibly fast. But again, that instinct for Martin to put his hand out, push me to the back, and put me immediately out of danger as that mamba was recognized in his brain shows the quality of human and hero and soldier that he was. It was automatic. Just pushed me out the way, made himself big, faced that mamba, and I think that mamba pooped itself. It was out because it was dealing with the true legend. It was gone.
Wow, it's extremely impressive. Yeah, I want to come back to Martin because I feel like he inspired so much of what you're doing. But before we do that, let's go on to Ruben because I feel like he's also been a huge mentor in your life and a big part of everything that's going on now with GCC and RHINO MAN as well. So how did you first meet Ruben? Because it sounded like Martin was first, and then as you got more into the Ranger Corps and what they were doing with the training there, Ruben became a big influence as well.
That's right. Yeah, so Martin was the first point of contact that I made from AFRTS, the business that Ruben and Martin co-owned. I met Ruben around a similar time, but Ruben normally was in and out, not so much the training at that time, but maybe 6 months later, Ruben started to do a lot more training around the Wildlife College. So he'd pull in a lot more. And Ruben commands a whole nother level of time and respect and authority because he gives that to other people in exchange. And I think that's why Martin and Ruben were so equally matched, because they had this mutual love and respect for each other. I remember one really interesting story about Ruben that shows you the character of who he is. And again, it was a bush phase, training rangers in the field for a week. There was a medical emergency where I had to get one of the candidates back from the bush back to the campus to get some kind of injection. They'd been bitten, I think it was by a scorpion. I needed to get them back. Ruben stayed, with the rest of the, let's say, 20 rangers. So I went back at 6 o'clock at night. The doctor had come out, gave the student some type of anaphylactic injection. The student needed to recover for a few hours. So I think, I probably had a shower and, rested. I then went back at 8 o'clock that night to our base with the ranger who has now recovered and had his injection, went back to the base. I see Ruben. How's it, Ruben? We're back now, safe. Everything's good. Okay, cool, Matt. We'll see it, all 400 in the morning we're going to do a 12-kilometer walk in the morning. This is our route. Sleep well and cheers. And I remember I was sleeping in a bivvy. So it was a stretcher without any kind of thorns or protection around me, just under a little, what would you call it? Like a 2x2 meter ground sheet. So basically sleeping out under the stars. And I remember just about to fall asleep. And I put my arm to the right to grab my rifle and to make sure that, because I was the only rifle on that course. I was the paid protection. And I put my hand to the right, a little bit further right, super far right. And then it dawned on me like a ton of bricks. I've left my rifle back at the Wildlife College campus. And you know what? People are people, but sometimes you just stuff up really bad. And I pooped myself. I was there for about 10 minutes trying to process what's Ruben going to do. How badly is he going to shout at me? The rules had changed, so I don't think he could have beat me, but it was a frightening proposition to go to someone of that stature, a tenured man who's been in the military, the Ranger Training Corps for so long, and tell him, as someone I respected and admired and looked up to, always trying to emulate Ruben and Martin. Excuse me, Ruben? Yeah, Matt, so it's a bit late. Is everything all right? Yeah. And I told him straight. He said, Matt, get in the bucky, go back to the college, get your rifle. You let me know when you're here safe. End of discussion. Okay, go, bucky, came back, got it. I got back maybe at like 10:30. And Ruben said, all right, you back? Good. Okay, you got all your rounds. Okay, you still wearing your shoes? Like you could tell like now this is when the punishment begins. But it was very interesting because the next morning it was like nothing had ever happened. The rest of the day, nothing had ever happened. And then I think a week later, after we had pulled out from the bush and deployed, I was having a cup of coffee with him back at the Ranger Training Base. And he said, Matt, I think you were hard enough on yourself to learn that lesson, but you only need to learn that lesson once. And I think I really appreciated that because he allowed me, he knew I stuffed up, but he gave me the grace of any human being to make mistakes and then to learn from them. And now I don't carry a rifle around, but I make sure that all of my equipment, the things I need to do my job now, my laptop, my phone, my watch, that everything's always charged up and ready to go, because that feeling of being solely responsible for 20 plus lives in the bush and you've forgotten your number one duty. I expected Ruben to absolutely destroy me, but somehow he was wise and kind enough to know that, the punishment was letting him down. And that for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And from the little I've gotten to know of Ruben over the years, I feel like he's one of those people that when you meet him, you kind of understand him almost completely instantly, if that makes sense. And that respect that he commands and that he gives, I definitely I couldn't imagine that feeling of coming to him with that particular issue. But also seeing in him his ability to recognize human nature and how people work and how they respond. And, I feel like that's, probably why he kind of left it as he did, because he could tell that, okay, Matt gets it. He's not going to make this mistake again, because even in it's, totally different situation without any life-threatening aspects to it. But in the film industry, there's the first AC who is the focus puller and also back in the day used to load the film. And I remember hearing that a lot of the big productions wouldn't hire an AC that hadn't flashed the film at least once, which means accidentally exposed the film. So if you're on set and maybe they spent millions of dollars setting up and shooting this scene, you accidentally open that magazine and the sun hits it, it ruins the film. You probably lost your job. But a lot of these people wouldn't even hire you unless you've made that mistake, because they know once you make it, it's so ingrained into your mind, body, and soul that you're not going to make that mistake again. So yeah, it's Ruben's a pretty amazing character. I don't know if you have anything else you want to say about him or his, ability to train or leave you with any other
Yeah.
teaching moments?
Yeah. One final learning moment from Ruben was when we as a community suffered the loss of Martin. And Ruben, who was best friends with Martin, you can imagine took the biggest brunt of it all. And I've always been really curious about this question. How do people move on when they lose their best friend, their life partner, someone that you do life with? Like how do you move on? And I think that was one phenomenal quality or trait or behavior that Ruben showed. Like I can imagine he was breaking inside. He talks a bit about that even in the film. But knowing that the work still needed to be done, that he had responsibilities to the greater mission that him and Martin stood for, Ruben's ability to carry on with humility, without anger, because Martin was taken too soon, and people could be really angry. People are angry when you lose someone too soon. The world doesn't make sense. But with grace, Ruben was able to continue. And I feel like Ruben's become an even better man through Martin's passing, because he's got now not just a hardened military background, but he's also got that greater sense of compassion and understanding of what it's like to lose someone that's so close to you, and gives me hope that when I go through losing people that I love, like there is something on the other side, but it's definitely in your control to determine how you approach the situation. And yeah, it's just been a really phenomenal journey to see how Ruben has just moved from strength to strength, and been someone that we all admire and want to emulate, without Martin in his life for the last 8 years.
Yeah, he's definitely just an amazing human being, and he still continues to do good work that's helping train rangers and people to be their best selves, as well as the skills that are involved. And I think that's, there's this skill set of being a ranger or any position, but then there's I don't know if you call it soft skills or what, but he's really invested in developing people to be their best self.
Mm.
And I think that's what, I don't know, connects me most to what he's doing as a human out there in the world. Just that ability to connect with people and develop them and see their best self and try to pull it out of them,
Mm.
which is, yeah, there's not too many people like that.
And John, to that point, sort of just switching the microphones around a little bit now and asking you a question. We've been talking a little bit about Martin and Ruben, some of these characters from the film. What is it that you hope that people will take away from all of these characters' lives? Anton as well, the candidates, the stars of RHINO MAN. What would that ultimate goal be? And how do you want people to feel? And how do you want people to act once they've been touched by this film and all these amazing characters that you've highlighted?
Yeah, that's a big question, and I feel like we're gonna go into the film a little bit more here soon. And a big part of the reason that I've been asking you about Ruben and Martin, and we can talk a little bit about Anton as well, is not only have they just played a huge role in your life and in starting GCC, but they're also the main characters in this film, RHINO Man, that this podcast is, kind of supporting and building this groundswell around the cause of supporting Rangers. But yeah, for me, what I hope that people take away, I think the thing that's attracted me most to this film is the human side of it, and that's what I've always tried to bring more of. And we're just really lucky with Martin's story as well, that when we had that final shoot in 2018, Ruben's friend Phil happened to be there with all this amazing footage of Martin and some of the training that they did back in, I think, 2011 in Kruger. So really finding a way to bring his story to the forefront and that connection with Ruben and this overall mission that Ruben, Anton, and Martin all had. And I think, there's the conservation side of it, which I think is important. But for me, I think there's even just the bigger side that anyone can connect to these amazing human stories and see the passion that they have for making a difference in the world and just kind of dedicating their lives to bringing that to life. And I think that's what I hope people can take away, is that if you have a dream or something that you want to achieve or some way you feel you can contribute to the world, if you just kind of give your whole self to it, you can make a huge difference. And all of these characters have made a difference beyond anything I could imagine. And when you meet them, you can just kind of feel it emanating from them, they're just so connected to what they're doing that it doesn't feel like there's any doubt in their minds. I'm sure everyone has those moments of doubt, but they just have such power of conviction of what they're doing and so much passion for, kind of what we were just saying, not only the bigger mission of conservation, but I think with all of them, Ruben, Martin, and Anton, it's really this bigger mission of making the world a better place for people and wildlife. So people, I think, is the number one thing. And yeah, so long way of saying, I think just taking away that you can kind of follow your passion and make a difference in the world. And these guys are definitely worth honoring and using as mentors in, through the film and connecting with that passion and mission.
It's brilliant, man. Yeah, I feel like I need to do something after that inspiring piece there.
I mean, every time I've watched the film, I don't know how many times through this whole process. And, sometimes after 1,000 viewings, it's probably my eyes kind of glaze over, but there's always those moments where, like I was saying, you hear Ruben talking about Martin and that his friendship and that connection and the amount of amazing things he was doing in the world and that he was taken too soon. I feel like that always inspires me to keep moving and trying to finish this film and also make things happen in my life, and do some good in the world. So yeah, really amazing human beings. Maybe we could jump into Anton a little bit too, because I feel like he's such an important part of the film and also kind of just the continued journey of our lives in GCC as well and what we're trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. It's almost like this trifecta of Martin, Ruben, and Anton. So yeah, I met Anton back, I think, in 2011 or 12 at the Wildlife College. He was there for one of the more advanced reserve manager classes or courses over the course of a year. And I believe he was on the student representative committee, the SRC. So, I'd see him quite a bit, really fighting at that point, for the rights of his fellow classmates, for whether it was, more experiences or field trips or food quality. Like he was really pushing at the forefront of his class. So yeah, I didn't spend too much more time with him. I just recognized him. Like one day we did a really cool 5K fun run at the college with him, myself, Orlot, the sergeant at Timbavati now. So we've got these moments, but I would say the relationship with Anton really deepened back in 2016 for our second RHINO MAN filming trip, of which there's a total of 5. So for that second trip, I remember spending time with Anton, and he took us into the bush, into a picket where he's usually based out of and runs operations from, and just to see the living conditions and what he goes through and his team goes through on a daily basis was really eye-opening. Because it's one thing, to see rangers in a training course, but to see them in their actual environments and what they deal with every day. And, even simple things like cell phone connectivity was rough at that point in time. So even in his off time, he couldn't be connected to his family. And we spent, for this first time on the filming with Anton, we spent 2 or 3 days with him. And fresh off the bat, actually a really interesting story. So we filmed Anton for an entire day, the life of a ranger. We tracked rhinos with him on foot. We did some drone stuff. We did some very highly produced interviews, really great stuff. And we thought we wouldn't see Anton again on that trip. That night we went back and somehow we bumped into Ruben. And Ruben had his mentor there at the time, and he invited us over for a drink. Well, that drink turned into 6 bottles of whiskey between 6 human beings. It was absolute chaos, but the stories and the adventures and the absolute excitement in which Ruben tells those stories just had us all completely enthralled. And I think we managed to get to bed at about 3 o'clock in the morning. And we had a really early start the next day because a group of rangers were graduating. So again, lack of sleep seems to be a common trend around here, but wake up at 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning, we film, we do another interview, we do an interview with Ruben. He's pretty, we're all kind of struggling. And we wrap up and we're like, all right, cool. Now we've got a 7-hour drive to the other side of South Africa to go and do some filming for 4 days. Then as we're driving, all of us just dying to get to bed that night. As we're driving, it's about midday. We see in front of us a vehicle that's rolled, and we see all these police vehicles. And we're like, well, that's very strange. What's going on here, right? And then we see Anton. And we're like, no way. So we get the camera out and run up to Anton and we said, Anton, like, what happened? And he said, when you guys left last night, we got an alert that poachers came into the reserve. We've been tracking them all night. These two guys here, they were shooting at us, caught them, and you could just tell like how pumped up and the adrenaline was surging through his veins. And that was the first, like, I would say, really like deep, impactful moment that I had with Anton, was seeing him in his full tilt. He had been tracking these men all night. He'd been shot at, and you could just see the fire. And that's really why he does what he does, is to be able to keep his rhinos safe, keep his reserves safe, and fight for his men's safety and for the wildlife's rights. And you could just feel the power emanating from him. And he says it in the film. He says, I'm still hungry. It's not enough. I'm still hungry. And it's real. And that was a really powerful moment, just seeing Anton stand up for something. And it's easy to say, oh yeah, we're gonna, do this. He did it. He did it.
Yeah.
So over the next couple of years, had more and more of these types of experiences with Anton. But the one really monumental, insightful conversation I had with Anton was one day, one of the DPs of RHINO MAN, Nick Smith, and I were with him wrapping up. I believe this was in 2017. And Anton all of a sudden gets extremely emotional. We're doing a scene where he's talking about rhino poaching, and he's got a horn, and he's talking, that this horn really doesn't have any medicinal value. It's for keratin, and he gets really emotional. And we start to find out that his children, many of them haven't been able to connect with wildlife, and that's actually his greatest fear. It's not the immediate threat of losing the rhino. It's this long-term idea that his children and the community youth that live next door to Kruger would never see wildlife, and they disconnected. And I said, yeah, Anton, but surely your kids come all the time. He said, no, my kids very rarely come, and the rangers' kids and local community kids, like the majority of them haven't seen wildlife. And so that was a huge moment for us, because up until that point, GCC was very focused on the rangers. But Anton said something very profound then. He said, Matt, we as rangers are buying the world time. Is what you do at that time that counts. And that's when the Future Rangers program was born, which is all around connecting youth from local communities that are adjacent to places like Kruger Park, and giving them that access. And not just the access, but helping them develop empathy, because if you don't love something, you won't protect it. And we get so angry with this whole rhino poaching crisis, and Anton explains it so well. But if you're a community member and you've never connected with the rhino, for example, before, and you have no intrinsic value for that creature, someone offers you money to go and kill it, like, of course you're going to do it, because it's going to feed your family. But the way that Anton put it, and you could see how much it hurt him, because when Anton grew up, he did see wildlife all the time, and he really put it in a way that showed me for the first time the urgency of why this was so important. Because if we have a generation of youth growing up next to Kruger National Park, where you've got around 4 million people now living in a very young population, if that population doesn't have value, it doesn't value nature, it doesn't care for the wildlife, and doesn't see the importance of its safety and security, well, very soon, you've got 4 million people living in substandard conditions up against maybe 1,200 rangers for the entire Kruger National Park area. Who's going to come out of that victorious? No one. And so Anton's insight and wisdom around investing in the youth, and not just getting more youth excited about wildlife, but getting more youth into the wildlife economy and benefiting and getting employment and getting opportunities, and also having a seat at the table where leadership decisions are made. Those are the kind of really unique and powerful insights that Anton brought into my life and into the GCC world, and has helped us do what we do. And even to this day, Anton's still a technical advisor to GCC. We still have the opportunity as friends to track rhinos, to talk about life, to do some bird watching when we can. So I just feel super proud, John, to have these people that I can call my friends, that are true legends and icons. And I feel like I'm on a continuous learning journey, being around people like Martin, Ruben, Anton, and yourself included, man. Like you're in this mix of doing something that seems impossible. I don't know where you'd like to take this chat, but just thinking about how hard this film has been to make from day one. It's coming up on 7 years since it was started. And I've got to be honest, John, like when I was working, we were both working at this production company. I had given up on the idea that RHINO MAN could actually happen. Because as you know really well, for a year and a half, 2 years, the film sat on a hard drive. It was dormant. It wasn't moving forward because of just of life. And there were some situations, and it's easy to to point fingers, but at the end of the day, that's the way it was. But if it wasn't for you stepping in and me being able to hand over that torch and give it to someone that not only had the passion for it, but also had the guts to go in and say, no matter what happens, I'm going to get this done. I think you've been following Martin's plan before you ever knew about him, which is make a plan. And I think that's a really special thing too, John, is like we're in the trenches every single day. I know you've put everything you have, you could be on the line for this project. It's most of the time soul destroying, most of the time uncertain. It's hard mentally, emotionally, financially, spiritually. It's hard on every single level. But when we get to talk about what this film could do, and just as importantly about what it represents to the people of South Africa and the rangers of South Africa, I think it's all worth it.
Yeah.
I think it's all worth it.
Yeah, and I want to dig into that a little bit more. I know we're running along. You have a little more time, right?
Yeah, probably, for sure. This is cool.
Yeah. I want to go into RHINO Man, and yeah, it's been quite the saga from the inside of just taking a project like this with, little resources and just kind of a dream to bring this thing to life. But before we dig into where I came in, how about, you don't have to go into too much detail because I feel like you've told this story before a lot of times and people can check out other podcasts. But can you briefly kind of bring us to that point where GCC and RHINO Man started and how that was all inspired and where you kind of where you were at in life? I don't know if at that point you really knew where you were going or what you were trying to do. You had gone to get your master's, you were working at the Cheetah Conservation Fund, spending some time there as part of your master's. But I don't know at that point in your life, did you know what you were going to do with all of this education and where you were going next? And then what happened in your life to inspire the GCC and RHINO Man?
Yeah, it's a really good question, John. So I was on this trajectory to, as quickly as I could, become as educated as I could be, because I saw how education could really open doors in the conservation space. There's a lot of people moving into conservation, but in order to have a really the impact that I wanted to make, at least, education was key. And so I got this master scholarship to study the reintroduction of cheetahs in Namibia, like you mentioned. So I was traveling between Michigan, where I wrote up my thesis and doing the coursework, and then in Namibia doing all this on the ground tracking and research. And I was in Australia in August 2014 when we found out that Martin passed away. And I sat with this knowledge and the sadness for months. And at the end of 2014, started to formulate this idea of how could we continue Martin's legacy? How could we ensure that all the work that he did in his life somehow carried on? It's going to get carried on regardless through all the countless lives that he touched, but something a little bit more targeted, something a bit more laser focused, something a little bit more within my control to influence. I didn't know what it was going to look like. At the time, I realized that every conservation organization that I really admired had either 3 or 4 words in a name. So, okay, I need 3. So Global Conservation Corps. Like I figured that was a good name because I wanted it to be a place where anyone from around the world could give something, could be a part of some change, could contribute to the bigger picture, something outside of themselves. I thought it could also be global because, money makes the world go round, but we all have something to give. It's not just finances. Like, we all have something very unique, a unique set of skills, passion, insights that we can give. And, obviously conservation is the name of the game, but the word core, which is not corpse, by the way.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up. A lot of people say corpse, but it's core.
It's kind of just like one of those things you learn to accept. But the idea that it's like the Peace Corps, the Marine Corps, where it's a group of dedicated people, all different walks of life coming together to fight or to create, maybe not to fight, but more to create and nurture and foster some kind of impactful change. It's that whole idea of the sum of the whole's greater than the parts. And when we started GCC, we incorporated on the 31st of May, 2015, which is the same day that Kruger National Park was incorporated in 1926 or 1927. So that was kind of serendipitous in itself, and I just found that out now. But I had no idea how to start up a 501c3. I was trying to get through a master's, but I just knew that something needed to happen. And so while this idea of starting a nonprofit was formulating, my dad had written a song called RHINO Man, and it had originally been written for me. And my dad's an amazing musician and artist, singer, songwriter, phenomenal. And he wrote this song and he played it for me in Hawaii over holidays in 2014, Christmas time. And I felt so inspired and blessed. And also, like, how cool is it that your dad writes you a song?
Yeah.
And I know you're looking to have my dad on the podcast and talk about his amazing career in music. But it was a really powerful idea that we thought, okay, let's get the song made. Let's also make a small little promo piece, a small little film, maybe a music video to accompany the song. And as things evolved, we quickly realized that in order to tell a story, it needed to be more than 3, 4, 5 minutes. It needed to be some type of shorter narrative. So that's sort of how, like, RHINO MAN, the song, the idea, the name came. It was from my dad, a gift for me, which then evolved into being a song for all the Rangers, which I love a lot more because we've got to see this as an inclusive song, and it is now really for the Rangers. I'm just inspired that my dad started that for me, but it's transcended to the bigger picture, and that's what it needs to be. And so while this RHINO MAN idea was happening, the nonprofit was forming. They sort of aligned at the same time, and then we did this original Kickstarter, which I think raised $13,000, which was, mostly friends and family that were like, "No, this seems pretty cool." And at the same time, rhinos really need help, and we really want to do something. And especially at that moment in time, the Rangers were very much, they still are, but very much at that point in time, underappreciated, unrecognized. We know now, talking to a guy like, Sean from the Thin Green Line, we've lost over 1,000 Rangers in the last 10 years. It's 100 Rangers a year. And we were very inspired to start something along the lines of telling the Ranger story.
Can you talk a little bit about that time leading up to 2018 when I got involved? And I don't know if I've really heard your side of the story in terms of just, so Friendly Human, the production company, ended up partnering with GCC and started developing this into a film eventually. It was like a trailer. Nat Geo saw it, said, "Hey, we want to see the feature film," which kind of inspired, like, "Hey, maybe this could be something bigger." But as you guys were going through that process, did you have in mind exactly what you were trying to develop? I guess it was, you wanted to find a way to support the Rangers, but you guys ended up capturing tons of different stories all around Rangers and rhinos. And I don't know what that process was like from the inside as you guys were going. Was it just kind of trying to figure it out? I mean, no one had made a feature film at that point. So I can imagine it was a lot of exploration, just trying to discover what this was. But yeah, I'd love to hear your perspective on those few years of, I think it was 4 trips before I got involved shooting in South Africa.
Yeah, so from 2015 to 2018, when we came down together, it was 3 years. And, I think we were also passionate in the beginning, especially in the beginning, about telling this story. I think as it progressed, none of us, like you say, were feature-length film directors. And we cast our net incredibly wide, hoping to try and pick up a really amazing story, something unique, something different. At that time, none of the Martin Mthembu footage existed. So, we tried to find, okay, who else are the RHINO Men? What else is going on? But we were always limited by a couple of things: finances for one, but then also time. We could only ever come to South Africa for a week or two at a time. Mm-hmm. And during that time, to try and build relationships with characters, as you know better than anyone, takes a lot of work and effort. And so for these characters to finally start trusting us, and then for us to get on a plane and go back, it was never enough. And I think different people had different ideas for what it would look like and what it would do, and the motivations for this project, it was different. And I think there were too many, let's say, cooks in the kitchen. And I think what we were lacking and what we needed was a leader in the director space that would come in and unify all of the potentials for this film, unify some of these key stories, or help identify these key stories, and then take it forward. But before you stepped in, John, it was really tough, because we'd make momentum, we'd do a sprint, we'd work 4, 5, 6 weeks, we'd have a cut, and then we were sort of back to square one because we didn't have the resources to stay focused on it. Mm-hmm. So it would be these sort of self-fulfilling prophecies where, again, things just, we never really moved the needle.
Just for context too, for people that are listening, you were living in Atlanta at that time, also working at the production company, trying to build up GCC on the side and keep the film going. So every time that you guys had to film, everyone had to fly over there, which it's not a cheap flight to South Africa, and it's a long flight, and it's a lot to take a bunch of film equipment and get over there logistically, let alone, like you said, trying to develop these relationships, which, the ones that we ended up using in the film were relationships you had been building over the years and were the people that stood out the most. But yeah, I'll let you go on from there. I just wanted to let people know where you were at
Yeah.
and coming from.
Yeah, thanks, John. It was definitely and it's such an emotionally charged subject as well. And I know one of my many flaws is getting too emotionally involved in projects. And so you take it personal. I remember one time I was about to get on a flight back to South Africa for filming in 2017, and I got a phone call saying, "Hey, the Rhino orphanage you were filming at a little while ago has been hit." And it was from Axel talking about it. And it's just like, and I got so frustrated, like, we're not moving fast enough. We're not getting the story out there. And it's been a frustrating, especially those first few years where the urgency at that point, it was 1,000, 1,200 rhinos being killed in a year. And we had the ability to make something. We just couldn't quite connect all the different puzzle pieces on that board. So it was challenging before 2018 when things changed.
Yeah. Yeah, and for me, I mean, when I got involved in the project, I never imagined myself becoming the director of it. For me, I saw the trailer that you guys made, which was super inspiring and showed the story and the context and these amazing rangers and what the rhino poaching crisis was, which I really knew nothing of coming into it. I had moved to Atlanta in 2016, and I think I saw the trailer probably shortly after, and I was like, "Oh man, I'd love to work with these people. It seem like they're doing really cool projects." And I want to be a filmmaker. So, this is a feature film. They're not just doing, corporate videos. They're also doing this other bigger projects that have a bigger cause behind it as well. And I think I pursued working at the production company for about a year before I actually got a job there. And then that's when I was able to kind of see the cut and where you guys were at. And I remember seeing all these amazing stories and thinking, whoa, this is like super cool project. I love all of this, what's going on. But then kind of connecting with you and seeing that it kind of stalled and weren't sure where to go. And from my perspective and just, my background in film and wanting to tell stories, I felt like we needed to pick out what those main characters were and really tell their stories and have some kind of story arc for the characters in the film. And that's when it was probably like April, May of 2018 when we started sitting down with a bunch of index cards. It's like classic scripting kind of project, but sat down and just wrote out all the scenes that we had, decided, we wanted to follow Anton for sure. We found out that Ruben was doing another selection, so we wanted to focus on him taking a group of candidates through a selection process. I think we had another ranger at the time that we were potentially going to follow, but lost some contact with. And like you said, at the time, Martin, we didn't really have any footage. We had maybe like 2 photos, and they were low resolution, and that was about it. So it was going to be hard to tell his story. And we just did the best we could, wrote out some scenes, tried to pull the story together, and managed to raise some funds to kind of take the leap and go back for, was it 2 weeks? I guess it was 2 weeks that we were there in 2018. And that was, for me, how I got connected to it originally. And I just wanted to find a way to help get this project to the finish line. And that was the first time I was ever in Africa. South Africa was on that trip in 2018, and I got to meet Ruben and Anton. And like we said, we found this amazing store of footage of Martin and just had such an amazing experience connecting with these people. And for me, that's what it was. The people were so important to this story, and those two characters, the 2 main people we follow, Ruben and Anton. We could maybe dive into some of those stories in South Africa. I know we mentioned before we had the podcast started that we wanted to talk about the final day of shooting. I don't know if there are any other stories that stood out in your minds from that day or that 2 weeks, I guess.
Yeah, I remember really well the first night we landed in South Africa, and our friends Anel and Ashwell put us up at their house at the Wildlife College. And there were 2 beautifully immaculate stretchers, army stretchers, put out on the floor there for us. And we've been traveling for like a day and a half, 2 days, completely exhausted. unloaded all the equipment, batteries on charge, ready to go shoot 6 a.m. the next morning. And Nell gave me a sleeping tablet. And I remember somewhere around 1 o'clock in the morning, hearing this loud scream and crash, and your stretcher had snapped in half, and you smacked into the floor and spent the rest of the night curled up on a tiny yoga mat and a blanket.
Yeah. I briefly told this story on Ash's podcast interview, which he was the first one we did for the RHINO MAN podcast. But yeah, I just remember going to sleep. We had a nice meal with them. It was when I first met them. They're such amazing people. But I think I was finally starting to fall asleep, and I just felt like I was falling backwards into like a pit. And then all of a sudden I hit the hard floor and woke up and was like, what in the heck happened? And yeah, I'm a tall person, but I'm not jacked like The Rock or anything like that. So I think I just had a faulty cot. but yeah, it was just completely snapped in half. And I think you kind of looked over at me, but your eyes were glazed from the sleeping pill. So it was just like a zombie there. And then I was like, oh, what am I going to do? And found a nice, 1/8 inch thick yoga mat that I slept on for the rest of the night. So it was a heck of an introduction to South Africa. But yeah, it got better and better from there. And I remember from my point of view, just being pretty nervous going into it because I had done a lot of shooting, and that's kind of was a big part of my favorite aspect of filmmaking was the shooting part, but I hadn't done much for years really. And I think when we were getting ready to go, I had managed to kind of jump onto one of our projects at the production company and decided to shoot and use the cameras because I was like, I need to get used to these cameras. I haven't used GH4, Panasonic GH4s is what we were using before, and I knew we were just going to be running and gunning, and it was just you and I on that whole trip. So there were a lot of nerves kind of building up into it, but somehow it managed to all click, and we captured some really amazing things on that little
was
adventure.
Insane, man. I mean, you were shooting, you were directing. I was semi-producing and running audio at times, which I think you'll notice the audio isn't like top quality when folks watch the film. But that was a phenomenal trip, and we got sponsored by Subaru, so we had an amazing vehicle. It was a whirlwind. I'm not sure if there's any other moments for you, John, that stick out before we made the pilgrimage down for that final tribute to Martin.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the things that stood out the most were just, like I said, the people and meeting Ruben for the first time. I felt like instantly I just respected the guy so much, and I could tell your guys' relationship. He definitely likes to joke with you a bit, and and it was an amazing experience working with him and seeing these young candidates go through the selection process was pretty amazing too. And seeing some of them just dropped out early and didn't give it a chance, but then the ones that stuck with it kind of saw this transformation of them kind of coming into their own and saying, oh, hey, I've got more than I thought I had, which is a really cool experience to have. Been able to do that twice now with 2 selections. And then meeting Anton and getting to know that guy and just the friendship that's come out of that few days with him. I mean, we spent so little time, but so much of the film is from that trip. And especially with that last day with his son, Grant, going out there. And I felt like everything just kind of aligned. And we got some amazing, amazing images for the final portion of the film. But yeah, maybe you could begin the story of the last day of shooting on RHINO MAN.
Yeah, so it's actually the final 2 days. So the whole piece about digging deeper into Martin's story was always hard, right? We talked about coming across this archival footage, but halfway through that trip in 2018, when we were down here, we talked to Ruben and he said, it's possible that Martin's widow, Simongele, will talk to you about Martin's life. Maybe you could even go and visit her. We said, oh, cool. Like, how long of a drive is it? Okay, maybe 15 hours, 16 hours. Okay, roger that. So we got in the car, we did a full drive down there. We definitely got pulled over for going a bit too fast. That was quite an interesting one. And and then so we stayed over halfway back down to KwaZulu-Natal, which is where Martin was from. And that morning, the phone rang. I think you and I remember that phone call really well. And it was Simongele, and she was saying, there's a family member here that doesn't really want you guys to come and film me anymore. And if you do come, you're going to have to bring a large amount of cash because they want money for this filming. And we said, look, like, I think I'd spent my last $5,000 on the 2 plane tickets that brought us back to South Africa. I think we were both pretty well maxed out. You'd invested in some equipment. Like, we were pretty well down to our last penny. And what we had done is, we had loaded up the vehicle with so much food and supplies and gifts for the family as a small way to say thanks for having us and allowing us to tell Martin's story. And I remember putting the phone down, looking at you and saying, John, like, I don't know if this is going to work. That they might not let us even get into this tiny town with the way that they were talking. I'm not sure if we can actually pull this off and see where Martin's buried. Remember that?
Yeah. Yeah, I do remember that. I remember, yeah, a lot of frustration and just, I guess, not being sure of what was going to happen. And we went and Kentucky Fried Chicken just happens to be in every country in the world, and everyone loves it. So we grabbed some real supplies and then some Kentucky Fried Chicken, and we just took the leap and we're like, well, let's just go there and see what happens. So it was probably, how long of a drive was it from where we stayed the night before? Because we didn't make it all there in one go.
No, we didn't. It was about a 4-hour collective drive. I think we left at about 8 in the morning and got there at 12 or 1 to the house. But on the way, you and I were driving through this incredible mountain pass, really starting to hit the KwaZulu-Natal Drakensberg Mountains. And I remember having this moment, and that Subaru was beautiful, had a sunroof, a moonroof even, and just starting to think, talk to Martin and just say, Martin, like, we've invested our final 3 days of shooting to tell your story. If you're out there watching over us, please make this work. Please give us a sign. And you'll remember we started looking around. I looked up, and through that moonroof, there was a massive female crowned eagle flying right above our car. Now, crowned eagle is one of the rarest and biggest raptors we have in Southern Africa. It's a specialized bird for forests. It's got a shorter wingspan, but a really heavy bird of prey. It's a monkey killer, flies through tree canopies. It's built like an absolute ox. And that was Martin, just built like this powerful royalty. And I looked up and I just knew. And it was the sign from Martin, an omen saying that I'm with you and it's going to be okay. And turns out it was.
Yeah. Yeah. That was probably one of the most amazing days of my life, actually, but of that shoot for sure, is just kind of arriving at this small little mountain town, just a beautiful landscape, and meeting Simangele. She's such a sweet woman, just very kind. Martin's mother was there as well, which was pretty amazing to meet her. And yeah, we had a great interview with Simangele, and then she took us up to Martin's resting place, and we captured it all on video, and it was just, yeah, really touching. I mean, you could still see the emotion in her eyes. I mean, it had been, 4 years at that point since he had passed, but there was still so much love there, and sadness over the loss. It was just really special moment to be able to capture that and to kind of see you as well. You told me so much about Martin leading up to that point and your connection with him, and kind of just to see how that experience affected you was pretty powerful as well.
Thanks, man. Yeah, that was a very, very special day and super emotional, and so good that we could. I mean, that's like one of the greatest photos I have is a selfie with you, me, and Simangele is there as well, and just like smiling with all our camera gear and tears in our eyes because we'd finally been to the resting place of this icon. And just being in his presence was something else, and being in her presence, and like you say, the way she talked about him and still loves him even though he's crossed over, was a really special moment. And it was divine providence that happened, because without that closure to Martin's story in the film, it would be a very different feeling. And I think being able to take the viewers to a very special, hard to find, rare, almost like a secret location, and give viewers an insight into what a real traditional Zulu community looks like as well, is a really rare opportunity, not just for us, but for the viewers as well.
Yeah, I think it's the most powerful part of the film for me. It's the one that hits me when I was talking earlier about, I kind of get these moments where I feel like I hit an obstacle or I'm down or something like that. It's that scene that gives me that energy and fuel and connection to Martin's spirit and what he was trying to do in the world. So yeah, it's super, super special. I mean, that was overall just an amazing trip. And that was 2018. It's 2022 now. This project has taken way more than I think any of us have ever thought or imagined it would take to get to the finish line. And we're Not there yet, but we're very, very close, super close to being finished and getting this thing out into the world. I mean, there's so much to cover. I really want to get to kind of some of the recent obstacles you've had in your life in the last 3 years, but just leading up to that moment with the film, we came back, we brought on an amazing editor, Jacob Ross, who's become a great friend as well, to kind of take the film to the next level, incorporating a lot of this new footage. And we had a screening, kind of like a test screening in Denver at RHINO Week in 2019, where we showed that rough cut and had really a great reception. A lot of people really loved the project, where we were going. People wanted more Martin, which we brought him into the film, but later on realized we could even bring him in more, which has been really amazing part of kind of finishing this film off, telling his story. But I remember, maybe you could tell this, our buddy Andrew, well, I had just first met him then, but Andrew Ackerman was a good friend of yours, and he was living in Boulder at the time. He came to the screening, and maybe you can kind of tell the next stage of that story and how that, we thought we were really close, maybe a few months away from being done in 2019 at that point. But he kind of inspired us to take it to another level and push ourselves way more than we ever thought we could push ourselves.
Yeah, which love him and I hate him at the same time. Ultimately, so Andrew is just a world-class filmmaker and human being. And he came up to us after the screening in Denver in the RHINO Art District on that Friday night and said, look, this is a really good film, but if you want it to be great, you're going to have to go in a lot. You're going to have to put in a bit more. It's going to take time. You could push it out to the world now. You might have some level of success, but if you want this to be a great film, you have to go deeper into the stories of some of these characters, and you've got to have the courage you've got to have the staying power. You've got to hang in there just a little bit longer to go further than no one else is willing to go, so that you can get something that no one else has got, which was really tough because you and we did think we had something. We thought we were done. We thought we would be on Netflix within a few months from there. I mean, we really were. I don't know if it was naive or hopeful or a bit of both, but we thought we were on our way. And I think Andrew was an amazing equalizer and leveler for us to help us take this film from good to great. And so it's amazing how people come into your life. I see Andrew every couple of years, but he was there in that moment to help us have the courage to question, have we done our absolute best? And I think you and I both felt like we could do more.
Yeah.
And that gave us the courage to endure, up until now, still closing the project out, but making sure that, you get one shot at a project or a film. You have one shot at a first impression. And if we get this one shot to send a message out to the world and to pay homage to Martin's life, Ruben's life, Anton's life, the Rangers' life in general, like, we need to make sure it's the best it possibly can be.
Yeah, for sure. I still remember you coming into my room. We were roommates at the time, shortly after this, and you were like, I think we need to take this thing to the next level and follow Andrew's advice. And I remember partially thinking in my head, like, oh man, like, we're not going to be done anytime soon, are we? But also taking that advice to heart and being like, yeah, once this thing's out there, it's done. And I want to put something great into the world. I don't want to just put something that's, pretty good, that, felt okay, but we could have taken a lot farther. So yeah, I think as soon as you said it, like, even though there was that momentary like hesitation in my mind, I was like, yeah, let's go. Not knowing what that meant. And I think talking about kind of 2020 through 2022, leading up to that, we just, we needed to raise funds. The production company was kind of at their end in the project and wanted to kind of be taken out of it at that point. So we need to kind of, they put in a lot of work. So we had to come to an agreement there and financially. And that was a process of trying to raise funds. And there were so many times where we thought we had them and they kind of fell through our fingertips. And maybe before we go into kind of how these last few years have been, because I feel like there's more than just RHINO Man incorporated into that, just saying that as we've gotten closer and pushed ourselves, we've had all these amazing things come together, like Marcel Van Leeuwen, this amazing artist. I reached out to him just because he's doing such amazing work. It's super beautiful, and asked, hey, could you do the poster for the film? We don't have any money, but would you help us out? And he ended up saying yes and created this amazing poster that we've shared on social, and eventually we'll have printed versions for people to buy and be able to hang on your wall. But super, super beautiful poster. And then we got Sipho Mchunu and Mendisa Dlenga to be on the soundtrack for our title track of the film. And they're, two of South Africa's most iconic musical artists, which has been an amazing process. And even Simone Wilson, the composer, I mean, he had done some work on a friend's project, but for pretty much a pittance, we've gotten him to create over an hour of original music for this film, which is some of the most amazing aspects of the film is this music. I mean, he's created a world-class soundtrack for the film, and I've just been listening to it when I go on runs or driving around town and getting so stoked about it and excited to share that as well. So it's just with so little resources, we've been able to pull all these amazing people together and just reach out and ask for help, and people have come through and delivered. And yeah, we're so excited to share this thing very soon and hope we can kind of take it to the next level and deliver on all these promises we've made. But kind of going into your life in the last few years, there's been a lot of challenges that have hit the nonprofit, yourself. Before we wrap up, I know we're kind of getting close to the end. I'd love for you to dive into some of these stories. So take it wherever you want, but maybe sometime in 2020, COVID, it's affected a lot of us in a lot of ways. I had come to South Africa in March to shoot more for RHINO Man. That never happened, and it's probably a blessing because I feel like what we have is what's meant to be in the film. But there were a lot of other adventures we went on during that time, and you've had a lot of your own personal challenges and successes as well in the last few years. So maybe dive into some of those any way you want to go.
Yeah, so to take you back to one of the more recent turning points. So you mentioned, so you and I, we were roommates. I lived in Atlanta for those 3 years, but in September 2019, my work visa in the States had expired, and it was time for me to move back to South Africa. I hadn't lived here for a long time. I hadn't lived in South Africa for 5 years. And so coming back in 2019, there was a lot to try and figure out. The nonprofit had started to do really well, generating substantial income and revenue, which could afford, for the first time ever, for me to get paid. Because for the first 4 years of GCC, I didn't take a salary. It was more important to derive my salary from doing something else and then channel those funds into our programs or hiring our on-the-ground staff. But when I came back here in 2019 in September, I was able to set up a base for GCC, sort of start to grow our team, and things went really well. And then, of course, the proverbial COVID came through. But just before COVID struck, you were able to sneak through, I think, on the last flight into South Africa before the borders shut down for 9 months, which I was and will always be eternally grateful for the fact that, I had one of my best friends in the world with me in the Kruger National Park, and we were able to do some phenomenal things with really limited budget and limited scope. But during that time, we were able to run the first GCC scholarship fund and training program ever, which we took 15 unemployed youth that we ran. I mean, it was 400 people that we ran through an interview process. We took the top 41, we put them in a selection, a crazy battery test for essentially a week. Ruben, I'm sure, talks a lot about selection. And then we provided scholarships for 15 students at the Wildlife College, which was really transformative to see the power, coming back full circle, the power of education and why it's so critical to equip, especially African youth that border these areas, with the tools that they need and want to be able to have careers in conservation. I think that was a really special thing. And during that time as well, some of the reserves ran out of funding because a lot of the reserves are really dependent on tourism. And so with no tourism, there was no overhead, no operational budget. So a lot of the rangers couldn't get paid some of what they earn or all of what they earn. And so you and I, it was brilliant. We put together a really cool video. And within the space of launching, 48 hours after launching our GoFundMe campaign, we raised over $22,000, which fed 50 ranger families for 6 months, which was a really big win for us. Obviously, at GCC, our main focus is education and investing in that type of intervention. But to be able to listen to the community and do something that was needed and urgent and really helpful, I'm proud of that for GCC. Some people talk about mission drift, but I think you also have to have the ability to do what is required and what's urgent at that time. Because, if we don't have food, we can't have education. If we don't have a house, we can't have a place to launch from. And I think it was just really, really impactful to be a part of that change where people from all over the world donated. I think it was $50 to feed a Ranger family. Sorry, it was $53 to feed a Ranger family for 1 month. And so many people got behind it. And just to see again that collective power of a community from around the world that wants to come together for a very tangible output, it was unreal. And you and I did that first food delivery together, and we drove across the entire Bushbuck Ridge and met the families of rangers and saw the rangers and went to their houses and saw the conditions that they live in and what something so small as a food package could do for the morale of families and communities. It was just a very humbling experience. And I think drives me even more to help build up skills in these communities so that more and more families and individuals can derive their own income and their own benefit and their own food packages rather than relying on aid. It's more important now than ever to make sure that people can provide for themselves. And that's really what GCC is aiming to achieve.
Yeah. Yeah. I think in that moment too, when COVID hit and it was kind of this fear of maybe we're going to not be able to employ enough rangers to protect the wildlife. And if no rangers are there, then it's just kind of free reign for poachers at that point. So that was a big fear, and being able to help them and support them and take a little bit of the load off was pretty amazing. And I remember we had conversations with Anton, like, what do you guys actually need at this moment? And for him, that was the biggest thing. And he helped organize, these are the types of foods that the families would, best be able to make use of. And it was definitely a cooperation with his team and our team to pull that all off. So that was definitely a special moment. But maybe a little bit more of 2020 and what that was like, because it was definitely, there were some amazing parts, but it was tough. I mean, I feel like it's hard to say tough when I look back and I'm like, if I would have stayed in Atlanta, I would have probably just been watching Netflix for months, sitting in a room, which was way more boring sounding than being out with all this amazing wildlife and hanging out with rangers for months. But it was definitely also, it can be kind of an isolating place where we were staying in the Hood area, especially when everything's locked down and you can't go anywhere.
It was a blessing and a curse at the same time, because like you say, we were in the greater Kruger area. We had access. You and I would go for like 5-10K runs and run past giraffe and wildebeest. You've had, when you did that 30-mile ruck that one day, you walked past the Pride of Lions like a few meters away from you. So we were very privileged in being surrounded by natural beauty, but we weren't able to see anyone else for 9 months. GCC is such an international organization. We couldn't see our donors. We couldn't see our staff. We couldn't see our board, our team. We really were sort of down here alone. And personally, not being able to see my family was really tough. It's really difficult when, you don't just have lockdown, but that you've got time zones and you've got, family that maybe aren't doing well and you need to see them. And it really was a challenge, but having each other, you and I, being able to at least hold each other accountable, still plan, some adventures, still stay busy, still stay positive. I think being positive sounding boards for each other and reminding each other that there was a lot of good really helped. I think that's also just indicative of how we as humans need a community. Like, there's all these social experiments or scientific experiments about how not just us, but other animals start to fall apart or degenerate or lose condition if that main factor of community isn't there. We can survive without food or water, but we can't survive without community. And I think even though we had a very small community, and our mate Justin Sullivan stayed with us for some of that, at least we had each other. At least we had that. I feel way worse for the folks that might have been surrounded by people or the ability to meet people, but that were spiritually alone because they didn't connect with a like-minded community. Even if it was small, what we had, it was strong.
Yeah. We were really lucky that I feel like we're kind of just wired in similar ways, especially when it comes to, fitness and working out and pushing each other to kind of achieve our goals. So it was definitely a special time. It's not too often where you get, locked into a beautiful location with a best friend and be able to kind of just focus on work and bettering yourself as much as you can. So that was definitely a time to remember for sure. And then, eventually it was come the end of 2020. I ended up going back to the States, there's a lot of kind of other behind the scenes stuff that was happening with losing funding for GCC. We struggled to purchase RHINO Man. We ended up shooting a whole other film because we thought we weren't going to be able to finish RHINO Man. Ended up getting RHINO Man. I came back to the States because I felt like at that point I needed to be here to really work through the final stages of the post-production. But at that point, you were kind of in South Africa on your own for a while. And I feel like 2021 definitely presented a lot of challenges as well, because, GCC managed to kind of keep chugging along and keep growing and doing so much with such a small dedicated team of mostly volunteers. But it's definitely a challenge when kind of the conditions have held things in this kind of static place for so long. So maybe talk about what 2021 was like, because I feel like you definitely had some close calls in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, 2021 wasn't my most relaxed year, that's for sure. Yeah, GCC since starting, we doubled our annual revenue every single year on year for the first 5 years. So we saw exponential growth up until the around the middle of 2020 is when we started to see things taper off. But even through most of 2020, most of our contracts held, we pushed through. But going into 2021, it was a whole different beast. I moved houses, I think, 3 times in the first half of the year for a number of different reasons, but a lot of unsettled, a lot of movements, a lot of restrictions still by COVID and the lockdown, a lot of funding restrictions. We had some of our partners pull out because, just their businesses weren't doing well. So we went from an organization that was set on this trajectory to surpass $1 million in annual revenue, a year or two down the line. And then we went to halving what we brought in. So things, did a 180 very quickly. And, we gained a lot of interesting insights during that time. So started to dive a lot deeper into our programmatic interventions. We understood the power of technology in the conservation space. And through those arduous times, we had a lot of creative breakthroughs on how, with very limited funds, we could make substantial impact at scale, which is now really where we're trying to make our difference. So on a professional level, it was very hard, but also very eye-opening. We've been able to learn from being extremely lean and tight on funds to now knowing what exactly to do as funds start to come back into GCC, which is great to see now that we're on the other side of COVID. Personally, there was no work-life balance. There were no boundaries. And I pushed myself so hard that I would go through these cycles of, sprints to burnout, recover, then a sprint to burnout, recover. And it was these perpetual cycles like a hamster on a wheel, pushing myself to the absolute limit of what I can possibly do, but never really quite getting ahead because the energy was, again, focused on the urgent, but not the important. And I think with that kind of mindset, took me to the 19th of August last year, where I was with my then girlfriend, my girlfriend at the time. We were driving to visit some friends for a long weekend. But my entire mindset was just frantic. And I think that energy was permeating through my outer world, because about halfway to the reserve we were going to, it was 4:00 in the afternoon, driving in this incredible car that the Mortgage Family Foundation had donated to us, a brand new Toyota Fortuner. We were driving along the Orpen Road, one of the main roads into Kruger National Park, on sort of like a highway, and doing about 120 kilometers an hour, so 75 miles an hour. And way out in front of me, there was this red little vehicle. We call it a skoro here. Kind of like a piece of junk, sort of on the left, driving in this far left lane, minding its own business. And that's just the way of life here. You see lots of those cars, and they always stay to the left. And as I approached, this car started to veer into my lane. And okay, no, all right. And things happen fast. You're doing 120 Ks, which is the speed limit on that road. That's the normal speed. And as I come around to pass this car, who's now in the normal lane, it just decides to turn across traffic into the petrol station. And once again, life really slowed down. And I tried to get around the car as quickly as I could, but there was no space. And so this red car T-boned us at the back, and we fishtailed a little bit, got pushed off center, and the car started pivoting on its axis, let's say, and we lost control. And I still remember the first half of the roll where everything moved in slow motion. We went right over left, and then everything went black. The first thing I've got very vague memories, and you'll hear why quite soon. But I remember screaming extremely loud for Lauren to wake up. I remember looking over, being upside down, seeing her covered in blood, covered, like just completely covered. All the airbags had been deployed. Broken glass was everywhere. Your body's in a complete sense of you don't know what, you have no idea. You've got no reference point at that. We had rolled about 7 times, and then I blacked out. And during this time, I only remembered this or realized this later, but I believe I had an outer body experience where I floated above the car, and I could see the car upside down, and I could see all these people. I could see all these people around and running and moving, and lots and lots of people. But I could see it like I was flying a drone, and it was peaceful. It was calm. There was no noise at all. No noise. And I had no emotion attached to what I was seeing. It was just seeing it from a very neutral place. And I only remember this memory 3 days later in hospital. So the way that things unfolded from there, and by the way, I could see the axle had been snapped and one of the wheels was missing on the car. Piecing it together, what I heard people seeing was me jumping out the side of the car, working with 3 members who were working at the petrol station, at the gas station, and we managed to roll the car off Lauren and drag her out of the car. I think I fell down. I blacked out because luckily none of that blood was Lauren's. It was all mine. I had a massive laceration on my head down to my skull, been cut open properly, a couple of cuts and bruises here and there. But Lauren's arm was had been crushed really badly in the car, under the weight of the car. And luckily, one of the drivers from the Wildlife College, Victor Searle, drove by and saw me and stopped, and he helped to settle the situation, because while we were trying to, in a way, fight for our lives, the neighboring communities had all rushed to my sort of verifying my out-of-body experience. They had all rushed, and unfortunately, because COVID has wreaked havoc on so many families, they were taking everything they could find, backpacks, I think a shoe, food. We had drinks in the car. We had, one of the GCC banners was taken. Anything that desperate folks could find and take was taken from us. And luckily, Victor helped secure that situation. Anel and Ashwell got the call. They got to us 25 minutes later. An ambulance arrived, got Lauren and I into the ambulance, and then to the state hospital called Tinswallow, which in Xitsonga means happiness, which it wasn't, because when we were there, COVID infections were extremely high. Luckily, at that point, our medical aid kicked in and they took us down to Nelspruit, and that's where we were for 3 days. It was really touch and go. With that experience, those airbags in that car saved our lives for sure. 100%. We rolled 7 times in a half-ton truck. And those 20 airbags deployed perfectly to give us that fighting chance. We spent 3 days in hospital, came back, and Lauren had her arm in a cast. She had to have some pretty drastic surgery to reset the bones, and we were sort of just bedridden for a week, just to kind of keep the flow going. Then being bedridden for a week gave me some interesting complications, which we thought for a while required surgery. Luckily, that didn't have to happen, but I took more time off. I took a holiday. When I came back to Hoedspruit, because I went to Cape Town to see some family, the day I got back to Hoedspruit, to my house, I got back and I saw one of my amazing colleagues and friends in Bonnie at the house, catching up on work, and I asked him where our mobile classroom was, because when I had left, it was in the corner. And you could just see the color change in his face, and he didn't know. Long story short, we realized during the time I was away on medical leave, we had been robbed, and 14 of our Google Chromebooks, which had been donated as a mobile classroom for GCC to impact the students in the communities, had been stolen. They also weren't insured because they arrived as I had my car crash in that same week. Luckily, the South African Police Service were able to recover those laptops.
That's an amazing story.
In a miraculous fashion. They did a random car stop at 2:00 in the morning. Two guys ran up with these backpacks full of laptops, and we got them back. But the story wasn't over by then. When you have, let's say, $8,000 worth of laptops in your possession, and criminals have been to your house, they know where to find them, and in a desperate situation like a lot of people face, especially through COVID, I spent 3 weeks waiting for those guys to come back. They had left traditional medicine, voodoo, in my house, making themselves invisible through all sorts of substances that they left in the house. It's sort of a traditional folklore it's called muti, where they think they can't be seen when they enter into your place. Well, for 3 weeks, I didn't sleep. And at that point, it really started to fray on me. Like, why am I doing what I'm doing? Even the communities where our schools are in turned on us when we had our car crash. It was a big moment, like questioning why do this when my own life and safety are being sort of compromised now. The final straw that I think broke the camel's back in 2021, when I was moving out of that house to come back to America to come see you, John. As I moved my mattress, under my mattress was a plate, and on that plate was ash, cooking oil, and grease, and it's called devil fire, and it's this traditional belief that it'll ignite your enemies on fire and they'll burn to death. So not only did I have criminals enter into the house for sort of, let's say, petty theft, but there was a malicious intent with how they wanted to see my life going. And that really hurts. I'm not going to lie. It made me question a lot about what we're doing. Is it having impact? Is it really making a difference? Is my life worth it? Because now there's like a target on my head. For whatever reason that is, I don't know. I don't know if it was I've hurt or offended someone, or if it's because we're literally trying to fight the criminal syndicates through our educational focus on stopping rhino poaching and empowering communities, supporting communities, working with communities rather than preying on communities. And that was sort of where it all ended. There was a cherry on the cake, whereby if I could just get on that plane to America and come see you, come see the mates, come see my family, get some space, have time to think. If I could just do that, it was going to be okay. And I remember getting to the airport to try fly to Atlanta. It was middle of October last year. So 2 months being in this perpetual state of fear and panic. I get to the airport and they basically tell me that I don't have I don't have the visa. I don't have a waiver from the US embassy to say I can go to the States. And I remember this moment where all these other people were going through security. And I remember texting you and texting the team and saying, this is unbelievable. The lady there said, look, let me take your passport. I'm going to call US immigration and see what I can do, but no promises. And I remember all the people filing through, there was no one left in that departures lounge. They started turning the lights off at the other side of the terminal. The janitor, the cleaning person was up, and there was one person there left at that desk. And I felt more helpless and vulnerable and just completely helpless than I have in a long time. I felt like everything was out of control. And through a pure miracle, somehow the person at the front desk had my passport and said, come see me, like, now, because you've got a ticket. That plane is holding the door for you. Get on. You're going to America. And I didn't believe it until that plane door shut behind me and we started to taxi onto the runway and the engines fired up and I came to the States. And I really needed that, because I had lost faith and I needed to find it again in community and in family.
Yeah, I remember you going through a lot of those experiences, and especially after the accident, just kind of the mental toll it took on you. Even just having conversations with you, it seemed like it was just kind of difficult for you to hold a conversation at that time. And that vacation seemed to definitely help on that side of things. But then, like you said, quickly after, you realized you were robbed and all this other crazy stuff happened. But I guess what's kind of happened since then? I mean, did you process that when you were here in Atlanta? What's your feeling moving forward with the work you're doing after after these experiences in a pretty brutal year in a lot of different ways.
I think having the time to process any trauma is key, to understand that it wasn't, to not take it personal, and to realize that there were learning lessons even in the hardest of times. I think that, let's say on a professional level, is that experience gave me the insight to truly see just how desperate people are, especially from COVID. The fact that they would rather rob you of a sandal or a bottle of water than help someone that's in a critical condition survive is pretty indicative of just how pushed into a corner a lot of folks are. And so having this realization that instead of running away from a potentially hostile environment, I wanted to return and to continue being a part of the solution, and taking those values and those lessons from Martin and Ruben about making a plan, not giving up. And there's this amazing quote, I think it's Les Brown, that talks about, in life, it's not so much about what you achieve, it's who you become in the process. And that growth and that self-discovery never happens when things are comfortable. It never happens when things are easy. And, it wasn't just an entire group of people that robbed us. There also were good people that helped us flip that vehicle. And 2 weeks ago, I drove past a petrol station and I was talking to the guy there and I said, "Hey, what's your name? Nice to meet you." His name's Prince. And I said, "Do you know about that crazy car crash that happened here last year?" And he said, "Yeah, I was there. I helped these guys. And I got, these two older people, a grandpa and a grandma, I call them a Madala and a Gogo, to come help me roll this vehicle off. And it was the craziest thing. And I just hope they're okay. What do you know about it?" And I said, "Prince, I'm that guy." And moments like that, where you realize that people are inherently good, it's just the situation and the environment that sometimes forces you to do things that you're not proud of. That the levels of desperation are so much that you have to resort to things that you wouldn't want to. It comes down to a choice, like choosing to believe that you can always see two sides to the story. You can see things in a positive light or a negative light, and choosing to see the world as a beautiful, open world of possibilities rather than a hostile, aggressive, uncertain place. End of the day, it helps you sleep better at night, and it helps you believe that change and a better world is possible. Just seeing it in that way.
So moving on from this, and it seems like you've definitely made progress in kind of recentering yourself and recovering a bit from 2021. Is there anything that you're doing differently in your life that you feel like has set you on a better track? And then leading from that, what's the future of GCC look like and where are things going?
Yeah, I think your internal can truly reflect your external. And, we're always looking for, I don't know if it's always or all of us, but a lot of us look for quick fixes, for like that easier way out. But I think you've really got to invest deeply into yourself, into your frame of mind, into your peace, into your happiness before anything else can really start to manifest. So from that crash, I really have tried to embrace a lot more of not a work-life balance, but just a more of a work-life integration, where I've realized that, yeah, rhinos continue to fall, and things aren't great, and we could always do more. But you also have to enjoy the life that you've been given, and you have to take the moments. You have to take those moments and appreciate the small things. You've got to take that personal space. You've got to have boundaries. I think having boundaries is a huge thing. In this world, in this work, all of us are so passionate and care so much. But if you aren't strong, you can't be fit to lead. You won't be good for anyone else. So I think I've been really fortunate enough to have friends and amazing people in my life that are encouraging me to see life more than just work and more than just a calling. You got to smell the roses. So that's on a personal side, carving our time, no matter how crazy things get. Most days at 5:30 to switch off the laptop, even if it's a half an hour, and go and watch the sunset. Or on the weekends, go into Kruger and get reminded about why you fight so hard Monday through Friday. You have to return to that inspiration. You have to return to the source and reason why you do what you do. And then from GCC's perspective, yeah, I think I mentioned this before, but through COVID, we really saw how we can have the greatest impact at scale. So as we look to the future, doubling down on our technology, our educational platform for youth, it's highly scalable, it's highly transformational, and it's it's highly usable as well. It's very user friendly in these communities where people struggle with connectivity and with data and with cell phones. We've developed an app that's able to really transform youth's lives and bridge that gap and help youth find those benefits in that greater wildlife economy. So doubling down on our app, but also now that COVID's subsiding, let's get more people back to South Africa. Let's get more individuals interested to come and see the work that we do. I think so. Pushing really hard on these GCC travel expeditions is another big thing we're focusing on. And then also back in the States is the ability to have events and to tell people and show people more about the impactful work that guys like Mboni and Lefa and Promise are doing every single day on the ground. So it's just about reconnection. We've been, let's say, in this incubation period for a while, but also in a survivalist mentality for a while. Now it's time to take all the lessons that we've learned, everything that we've heard from the community, from our staff, and bring it into a very succinct strategy that can drive long-lasting change. So I'm really excited for what GCC can do. We've got the most amazing team behind us. We've got a brilliant board. We've got amazing volunteers. We've got such a motivated staff from 17 different time zones. Now it's all about bringing everyone together and catalyzing this unified change and strategy, because we know that our vision has potential for huge impact. But now it's just about doing the hard work and seeing that come to life. So, yeah, it's a very humbling business to be in, because no one ever did anything great by themselves. And I think GCC is a testament to, the tens and hundreds and thousands of people that are all connected into this network that are fighting for that same vision. Where when you and I, if we're lucky enough to have our own kids one day, and Anton's kids are all grown up and they've got kids, and the next generation of youth are able to get together and to go and see wildlife, and not just see it, but have that innate love and passion, and they carry on our love for protection and what they do, gets me really excited.
Maybe as a last question, what would you tell people that want to get involved, or maybe just advice in general for people that want to follow some kind of passion or calling like this?
Mm. Yeah, I think being true to your heart is key. As cliche as that comes across or that sounds, because no one knows your own truth like you do. So I think tapping into your own personal truth. We all came to this world for a mission, for a purpose. It's up to us, though, to find out what that purpose is. And then once you find it, you need to surround yourself with mentors. You are the average of the top 5 people you spend the most time with. And never forgetting that you need to elevate who you are by surrounding yourself with exceptional people. That's key. I think those two things really set yourself in good stead. And I think you got to enjoy it. You got to enjoy it too. Like, passion's one thing, but you've also just got to be able to sit back once in a while and take joy in what you're doing. Like I've made the mistake of getting so focused on, performing in this conservation role, but you have to sit back and smell the roses and just enjoy the journey and not think so much about what that destination, that end goal looks like. That's important. But I think the true power of the human spirit is in the present moment, and being able to really lean into what you have right in front of you. Because you're never going to get to that spot where, let's say, you're a general in an army without fully embracing your basic training or your deployments or your training as an officer. You have to be present. You have to be there, because that's where the magic and the beauty is in that present moment. So yeah, that's what I would say. Is stay present, and you never know who you're going to meet at a random casino on a Thursday night. But if you're not aware and conscious and sort of, bold enough to take that step, that meeting isn't going to happen.
Yeah, it's really good advice. And it's been an honor getting to have you on the podcast finally and share some more of your stories and some of our collective stories. Is there anything else you want to leave us with before we go?
I don't think so, John. I'm just really excited to see this film. And just want to thank you again for being the front runner and the guy that can do it when everyone else thinks it's impossible. Yeah, really appreciate it, brother. Thanks for a great chat and listening to a long time of me speaking. It's a really special thing when you can create such a safe space and good space where you feel comfortable enough just to say how you feel and to feel recognized and seen and heard. I think that's what we're all looking for in friendships and in connection, is to feel like you matter and that, what you do counts. So thanks for creating that space, brother.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you. I wouldn't have taken on this project if it wasn't for all the work that you did. And inspiring people that you've connected to this project as well that have inspired me. So yeah, super grateful to be a part of this. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks, John. See you at the premiere, brother.
Thank you for listening to the RHINO Man podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and you're excited to see the film succeed, please subscribe and review our podcast on Spotify and iTunes. Then follow us on Instagram and Facebook at RHINO Man the Movie. More details about RHINO Man, the social impact campaign, and future screenings are at rhinomanthemovie.org. To learn more about the Global Conservation Corps and their work, visit globalconservationcorps.org. Sign up for the newsletter and follow GCC on all of the social platforms. If you like this podcast, make sure to subscribe and catch up on GCC's Voices of Nature podcast, where Bob Ludke interviews a wide range of people who have dedicated their lives to making a difference in conservation. A special thanks goes out to Simone Wilson for the music for this podcast. He's the brilliant composer for RHINO Man the Movie. Learn more about his work at simonewilsonmusic.com. Until next time, I'm John Jerko, and this is the RHINO Man podcast.